It's 1 o'clock and it's time to call this meeting to order. We'll begin by saying the Pledge of Allegiance. Where is our flag? Well, we'll still say the Pledge of Allegiance if y'all stand. I pledge allegiance to
the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
I want to welcome everybody. Our first order of business today is the approval of the minutes. Does any board members have any questions regarding the minutes that were in your packet? Kathy, if you have anything, just raise your hand so we see you. Not sure she heard that.
Yes, I heard that. Thank you.
Okay.
I move that we approve the minutes as presented.
I'll second it.
Okay, so we have a motion and a second. Let's take a vote on that motion. All in favor, say aye.
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 Any opposed, say nay. Okay, that motion passes 5-0. Those minutes have been approved. The next agenda item is approval of the expenses. Are there any questions in regards to the expenses that were in our packet? Seeing none. Do we need any discussion there?
I'm not sure if I need to make the motion.
There is no public comment. No.
Then I would move that the Parks and Recreation Board.
Do I have a second?
I'll second that.
Okay, Jody seconds that. Let's vote on that motion. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Okay, so that motion passes 5-0. The next order of business are reports from our individual board members. Does anyone have anything they'd like to report at this time? Kathy, would you like to start us here?
Well, in just thought of time, I'm going to wait and make some comments later on in this presentation. We're very active in Eastern Montana. My goodness, the meetings I've been attending, but that's a good thing. That's a good thing. That's all I've got at this point.
Okay. Anybody else? Okay.
Yep. Mr. Chair,
Jody, go ahead.
I would just been quite a bit of activity, but a few things that kind of caught my attention and things I was aware of. One, I do need to cover some of my tracks I did during the last meeting. I spoke about, we were talking about Spring Meadow State Park, Spring Meadow Lake State Park, and I was talking about how they use that for the kids and fishing, and the grade school is going to take the kids out this time and take them ice fishing. And actually that was not correct. The kids did get to go ice fishing, but they didn't get to go on Spring Meadow State Lake Park. So that's good. But in lieu of that, Spring Meadow is used for, they have a Sweetheart Passion Plunge, which I don't know, most people in the Helen area have heard about this. It happens every year. They take and they cut open the ice and people take a plunge at the take a plunge in the lake around Valentine's Day. And it is a fundraiser that's put on by local law enforcement and the folks that are involved with the torch run. They team up with Special Olympics. And so it's done to raise money for Special Olympics. And it's been going on since around 2000, and they've raised quite a bit of money for Special Olympics during this event. So it's kind of fun to see all the different uses that our parks get. You know, some of the things like you'd think here in the winter, not much going on, but it's fun to see some of the different activities and ways that our parks are utilized. So that's right here in Helena, Spring Meadow Lake State Park. There was 95 people jumping in that very cold water, dressed up like it's Halloween. It's crazy. It's quite an event. It's pretty fun. So anyway, and then if you remember just recently this summer, Fort Owen opened back up. And so people are gearing up to get some maintenance done there on the sites there. And the parks received a grant for restoration of the East Barracks there. It's one of the biggest buildings that they have there, and it's in need of some restoration. And the Friends of Fort Owen brought in an Adobe specialist from Arizona to deliver a presentation on restoration of these clay structures. And so that was early in February, and it sounds like it was really, really interesting. They've got some clay in the valley that they found a source for the product so that they can hopefully duplicate what was there, because obviously it lasted a long time. So, so this restoration work hopefully will begin this summer, and talking with them, might be able to work this in maybe during the peak season. And it would kind of be an attraction. You could watch these people working, doing restoration work on the barracks. So, and the folks are really excited about this. They did, if anybody would like more information on this, there was folks from Helena that went there, and a lot of other staff had been there for this meeting. It was filmed, and so they're kind of putting it together. The Friends of Fort Owen had a contact of somebody that's a professional at this videoing, and so they've got this presentation filmed, and they're going to put it together in kind of a nice little package. So that will, we think maybe it'd be up on the website. Maybe information about restoration would bring more interest into the park as well. So Fort Owens is got some exciting things happening. Let's see. And then there's a lot of stuff going on at Summers Beach. Of course, it's very exciting. That's kind of our new big project. It's looking really good. I did hear, Chairman, you and I were talking a little bit about, wasn't sure where we are on the Dynamic Beach project. Remember, we had a big presentation on that, and that is actually happening right now. So it's pretty exciting. Talked to a couple of folks in that area that are closer to what's going on, and the staff is excited. They're really energized. So of course, we've got some Summers Beach too, that we will be addressing here later in this meeting. So I'm sure if there's some folks here, if you got more questions on details on that for Summers Beach, but it's pretty exciting time. You kind of feel like we got the wind at our backs a little bit here, and there's a lot of activity going on. So it's pretty exciting time to be here and with it. So anyway, thank you, Mr. Chairman, for the opportunity.
Thank you, Jody. Any other member at a report? Scott?
So there's a lot going on Region 5, and I got to speak with Mike Ruggles, who's on camera, and Jessica Guzman. Jessica is our Region 5 maintenance manager, and got an update. Chief Pleniku State Park had a tiny house built by West High students. West High, of course, high school in Billings. And they built this house. There's an AmeriCorps member there now living in it. And evidently it replaces an old camper that they had there. Oh, I'm sorry. Yeah, I'll bring that up a little. And, but it was a collaborative effort. And what a win-win. I got to speak to some of the West High students. And so they had a hands-on project building this little house. They even brought in a plumber and a guy that insulated it. And evidently West High students went down, I know, for the insulation and maybe for the plumbing to witness how that was all done. And so again, it was great for West High students for the education and great for state parks in that we got to replace this old camper with a cool tiny house. So that's going well. On the 29th of April, there'll be a dedication at Chief Plinniku State Park for that tiny house. And they were talking about how many school groups have signed up to get a tour of Chief Plinniku State Park from all over the area. So that's another really cool thing that State Parks does. Cooney State Park is working on building between 2 and 5 new cabins, and those cabins will be rented out. And they're actually either exact designs of KOA cabins or close similarly. And so that'll be great to have those cabins. We talked about the fact that they could be used year round. So there's a lot of ice fishing on Cooney and cross-country skiing, and even Red Lodge Mountain for downhill skiing is relatively close. So we think those cabins will be hugely popular when they get built. Lake Elmo State Park, and I talked to Mike about this. I was really concerned about the invasive clams moving downstream. There's an outflow. As you know, Lake Elmo comes in east of Columbus, Montana, and starts its journey and goes through Billings as the Big Ditch, and then flows into Lake Elmo. And then it flows out of Lake Elmo back down into the Yellowstone. And so Mike said that they've been really watching it closely and think that they've gotten the clams. All it takes is either cold weather or dry. And they weren't able to drain Lake Elmo to the level that it was dry. But the Big Ditch dries out, and the ditch that's the outflow of Lake Elmo dries up. So that will kill any that were in there. And they're hoping that they've killed them in Lake Elmo. It also gave them a chance to do some new walkways and enhance the fishing for fishermen in the summer. I think they're doing some tree planting and trimming shrubs at Lake Elmo. So it gave us a chance to get some of that work done. And finally, Pictograph State Parks, or Pictograph Cave State Park near Billings was contacted by US News and World Report, and they're going to include the state park in a story they're doing called Best of Montana. So that'll be good advertising for the state Pictograph. And finally, Region 5, they're in the process of hiring someone to replace Terry Walters. And Terry has been with Fish, Wildlife, and Parks for over 20 years. And I've gotten to work with her. She's a great hand and a real advocate of our state parks. So they're in the process of trying to find her. And Doug Haberman's name came up, also part of that they're still trying to hire to fill. That's my report. Thank you.
Thank you, Scott. Vice Chair Mo.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I've been busy most of this time working on the Smith River project that has involved a group of people that will be later on the agenda. But I do have a matter of personal business that affects the board that I want to discuss with you before actually taking action. Some time ago, my husband and I became very aware of our desire not to be just holiday grandparents, the ones that your grandkids come to see for Easter, but the value as I had growing up in Billings of being able to stop at 101 Avenue C and see my grandmother every day after school if I wanted to. So we made the decision, it is simply not within either of our DNA to not live in Montana. But we do have 2 grandchildren in Missoula, and we made the decision to move there. We thought it would take quite a while, but as it happened, I fell in love with the first house I saw, and the rest was history. So I am aware that I am now not in the region from which I was appointed. And although the letter of the law suggests that I can stay on the board, I think the spirit of the law is that each region be represented. And I think it's very important for Great Falls and that area with such fantastic and unique state parks to have someone that is in that area speaking on this board for them. So when I go home today, I'm going to write my letter of resignation with great regret. I have loved this work. Everybody in my family laughs because I am sort of famous for being the person that would have the I heart not camping logo on my car. But my husband and I have both enjoyed getting to know the issues around the state park and going to each one of them and seeing what they are. And when I look at this agenda today, it is so meaty. And there are so many exciting projects going on. When you think this board really has only been in existence essentially for a 2-term kind of thing, it's really remarkable what's being accomplished because the staff is good, but also because you all are good. I've served in a lot of public offices. I've been elected to 3 and served on this board and that. And each has its charms, but there's really nothing like people like us that are just getting together, rolling up our sleeves. We don't get paid. Most people don't watch what we're doing. But, sometime 10 years from now, you're going to be pointing out the window and saying, I helped get that going. And it's a pretty neat feeling. So I wish you all well. I wish I could stay. I've gone back and forth on it in my mind a million times. But usually if it's the hard thing to do, it's the right thing to do. And so I will serve until I am replaced, but I do intend to write that letter before the weekend is out. And I wanted you to know in advance. Thank you. Thank you.
We are going to miss her. She's been very instrumental in moving us forward on some of these projects. Robert's Rule of Order 50.17 says a resignation of a member of the board or committee should be addressed to the appointing power and its responsibility of that power to fill the resulting vacancy. So Member Mo will write a letter to the governor's office, and then it's up to him to replace her. And I'm not certain on if he doesn't replace her in a certain time, does Member Mo stay on this committee? Zach, would you know on that?
Chairman Kip, members of the board, Director Warsick, excuse me. I don't have my Robert's Rules of Order book handy, so I'm going to go off of what you've said. But I think, as Member Mo indicated, I think there's room in the statutory authority for the board for her to serve in that capacity until replaced, if that's what she wants to do.
Okay, thank you. Is that everything you had?
It is.
Okay. Well, my report is there are some things that happen in the winter in our parks. At Bannock, in January, we had a reenactment of the hanging of Sheriff Henry Plummer and a couple of his deputies. And that is put on every year by some reenactment players for Bannock and by the Bannock State Park employees. Afterwards, the Bannock Association has their annual dinner fundraiser auction, and they have pot roast for their dinner. So you kind of have an idea of the age of the people that are attending that dinner. But it was a lot of fun. We made some money. It was a fun event at Bannock. The second thing we did in February was the Wise River Jack Pine Savage Snowmobile Club got a brand new groomer, and we had a ribbon cutting with Governor Gianforte down there. Charlie came down and acted as the MC. After we did the ribbon cutting, we went for a small snowmobile ride with the governor. Director Warsack took the groomer out for a little spin, kept it away from the helicopter. And but that machine is valuable to more than just the snowmobilers that ride the trails. As I was mentioning, we had a lodge, and because there was grooming, we had people that stayed at our lodge and they snowmobiled. But I was also able to keep my employees that were seasonal for summer and fall work employed through the winter. So I didn't have to look for new employees next year at the beginning of the warm season. But those groomers, that whole program really adds a lot to the economy in our regions here. So that's all that I've got for a report from my district. Okay, the next order of business is Director Warsack's agency report.
Mr. Chairman, members of the board, Hank Warsick, Director. I guess I want to start out by saying we're hot and heavy into the reorganization, and that's all going really, really well. A lot of hard work done by a lot of people to get this done, and I really appreciate their willingness to work together, come up with solutions, and get this grounded as soon as we can. So I don't know if Hope's going to talk more about it later on today or not, but I'm sure she will. I'm just really impressed with everything they've done so far. So, and to the Jack Pine salvages, that was it was interesting from my perspective to be in a meeting in May and talk about this new equipment coming down and what they anticipated, what it was going to look like, and how excited they were about it. Then to be able to actually go down there and see it. One of the things I did ask when we were talking about it is, I said, if we're with FWP, I'd like to see a big logo on the groomer. And they said in the past, they haven't put logos on the groomers because it was a little, they didn't want to be part of FWP. So when we got down there, the guy brought me to the back and said, here, check this out. Here's two gigantic logos on the side of it. So I was appreciative of that. I mean, and it was it's a Trans-Montana charity ride for NAMI. There was a lot of individuals there from out of state. They indicated that one person came here from, I think, Nebraska and ended up buying a snowmobile there just to do this. So it brought a lot of money into it. It's a really good effort. And as the chair was saying, it brings these communities together. And one of the things, the other thing I heard about was that they had used one of these groomers to rescue a couple individuals that search and rescue couldn't get to, and had been ran with their snowmobile. So they used not this groomer, but a different groomer to do that. So it's interesting how they can do things like that and help out the community on that. Other than that, I really don't have anything else to say. So thank you.
Okay. The next item on the agenda is the 2023 Fish, Wildlife, and Park budget goals, which Director Warsack will present.
Mr. Chairman, I'm going to have Zach stand up and give kind of the background of this before we get into it.
Chairman Kip, members of the board, Director Warsack. You'll notice in the board's statutory authority at 23.1.111, one of the authorities that is granted to it is to review and approve the department's budget. That's the same language that you see in the commission statute, same authority that's granted to the commission. The practice for the department, since from what I can tell, going back as far as 1994, has been to present that those budget priorities in sort of an advisory capacity. And that's based on a legal opinion that was provided by Chief Legal Counsel Bob Lane at the time. And that was, he founded that reasoning on the fact that there is this statutory role for the board of the commission that he was looking at. At the same time, there are a number of other competing constitutional and statutory authorities for not just the department and the director, but executive branch in general that require a budget to be submitted regardless of how it's, there are specific processes that you have to go through and that have to be met pursuant to a particular timeline to present that budget. And so what you'll see today is broad priorities and goals. That has been how we've presented these budget matters to the board and the commission for almost 3 decades now.
Well, I'm also going to have Lena. She didn't know that yet. Go up and speak a little bit more on this too.
Chair Kip, members of the board, director, thank you. I'm Lena Havron, Chief Financial Officer at FWP. I was just going to talk to you today about the financial health of the agency. You have some graphs in your guys' binders that go over the funds that mostly strongly affect Parks and Outdoor Recreation Division. The first one being the general license. The graph that's in front of you just represents what we potentially could request in the upcoming session, what we're moving forward as of right now. And you see a fund balance. What we do is in my bureau, the budget bureau, we take all the requests that people want to do and we put them in an analysis format to make sure the fund doesn't go negative or below the target revenue or ending fund balance that we need to maintain ongoing expenditures. So we look at it in a couple different ways, but I've given you guys the same graphs that I give the director's office to make those types of decisions. So the general license is the sale of hunting and fishing licenses. That funding, the revenue comes from that funding source. It is used in this division now. So I've given you that graph so you can take a look at what the general license account is doing. The next one we have traditionally called the Big Four. The first graph is an overview of all the funds and the ending fund balance as a total. And behind those are the individual Big Four balances. So you can see how the proposal looks for the bed tax, which is a statutory appropriation for the maintenance of the parks, the 02274. 02408 is coal tax. And as you can see, if you look at that graph, the fund balance is declining. So my bureau will put forth a presentation to the director's office on a funding solution to make sure Parks and Outdoor Rec can continue to spend, but probably not spend out of that pot of money. The next is 02411 Parks Miscellaneous funding. This is kind of the main funding source in the division. Actually, I can't say that anymore. I'm not quite sure anymore. But all different types of revenues come in here. A portion of the $9 license revenue comes in here. And that fund is doing rather well. The last one is 02412, and that is the Motorboat Fuel Tax. And that revenue is pretty consistent and ongoing. So the overall health of the agency is strong. Our fund balances look fairly good for all funds, other than a couple. So as we move forward in this process of figuring out what we want to request, we'll keep these updated and keep everybody informed. Thank you.
Go ahead, Member.
I recall that a couple of years ago, the legislature allowed for an increase in the licensed revenue. And there was also, it seems to me, they changed the law so that instead of you're opting out of paying that, you had to, am I wrong about that?
Mr. Chairman, members of the board, Director Dustin Temple, Deputy Director at Fish, Wildlife and Parks. Mr. Chairman, Madam Vice Chair, the bill, it was contemplated that a number of different ways. The final resolution to that bill is the price was increased from $6 to $9 and the opt-out remained in the statute. And so when you look at that 02411, the major component of revenue into that fund is the light vehicle fee. And so that most of the revenue increase you see in 02411 on your graph is derived from that increase from Senate Bill 24 in 2019.
Yeah.
Mr.
Okay,
Chairman.
I had the opt-out thing backwards, and my question was whether that had affected it, but that's moved now. Thank you.
Mr. Chairman, Member Brown, in 02411, what are you looking at? Mr. Chairman, Member Brown, if you look at I might actually turn that back to Lean. I don't know exactly how far out we've projected that. Typically over time, what you will see is a change in participation. You'll see sometimes after a fee increase, it'll drop down and then bounce up and then taper off again. That may be part of the explanation, but if Ms. Haberman has additional information, Mr. Chairman.
Mr. Chair, so I'll continue on and basically budget priorities are the highest level objectives where the department will focus resources during the fiscal year 24-25. These priorities will be used to drive the fiscal year 24-25 budget request, fiscal year 23 budget allocation, and all department work from fiscal year 23 through fiscal year 25. The overarch ongoing work and the department conducts as routine basis as part of the core programs and services. These priorities can be accomplished through a redirection of existing funds, a budget request to the legislature for new spending authority or funding, or spending from existing funding in the next biennium. We expect to follow priorities closely, barring emergency issues or crises such as a pipeline spill, train derailments, disease outbreak, weather events, or other unanticipated circumstances that could require the department to shift budget priorities during the biennium. Our goals, our customer service objective is to provide public with the best possible experience. Our goal is to continue to improve our technical interface with customers, our website, FWP app. We just released that actually yesterday, or the first on the My FWP. So there is an app now for your phone that you can get hunting license and everything else on that. So that's where we're going on that. Continued implementation on the Parks and Outdoor Recreation Division reorganization to better serve the public. And partnership objectives, improve relationships with landowners, hunters, and other partners. Our goal is to invest additional funding to address access and recreation opportunities, assist citizen groups and communities as they develop recommendation to improve hunter and landowner relationships. And this one too, I've also just appointed a a 12-member board or a group to work on that. We're waiting to make that announcement here within the next week or two to work on some of these other issues. Next goal would be stewardship objectives, maintain and support cultural, historic resources, habitat, and healthy, abundant fish and wildlife populations. Goals to continue to work toward delisting and recovery of the recovered grizzly bear population in greater Yellowstone in the Northern Continental Divide ecosystem. Develop new approaches to support and maintain delisted population of wolves and sage grouse. Complete a statewide elk management plan. Initiate statewide mule deer initiatives and improve understanding of management. Address 20% of the maintenance backlog for the department's facilities and lands. Increase the number of maintenance visits to FW property by 20%. Our recreation objectives improve outdoor experience for the public. Goals will be to improve public parking on department-owned facilities and lands, i.e. state parks, fishing access sites. Develop statewide strategic plans to address increased visitation and participation. Develop specific high-need site planning, i.e. Fish Creek, Summers, Placid Lake, Missouri Headwaters, Cooney, First 50, Buffalo Jump. Increase public access to public and private lands. Improve land acquisition, develop directive along the lower Yellowstone River for improved access and habitat protection. Expand capping opportunities statewide and continue to work toward equitable access to most of our used rivers. Our workforce objective is to value our workforce. Our goal is to address staffing issues through housing, work from home, improving agency culture and other innovative approaches. Ensure FWP offices and administrative buildings provide a safe, healthy, and productive work environment for employees, and continue to provide better support and training for managers through this agency, and continue to improve onboarding and training for all new employees. So that's pretty much it in a nutshell what we're focusing on. Any questions?
Does the board have any questions for Director Warsack?
Mr. Chairman, are those goals that you have just recited there? I notice they're not in our materials, and I'm concerned about what the record will reflect that we are voting on. And I'm a little concerned about the motion itself in that I don't feel like I can approve the Fish, Wildlife, and Parks budget. I can only speak to the parks component of it. So I'm a little concerned about that.
Dustin, you want to handle it?
Mr. Chairman, Madam Vice Chair. So the budget priorities you see in front of you we've been working on them for the last several weeks or so. This really represents the board's opportunity to either accept them as is or provide the department with further direction to refine those. And what these represent is these are the things that the agency and the director is committed to, so that as we construct our budget request, these are the guiding principles. Now, to the piece of these, there are the Fish and Wildlife Commission is going to see the exact same goals and objectives, barring, to include any changes the Parks Board may have us make to these. Parks and Outdoor Recreation, of course, that division is expansive beyond what used to be the old State Parks Division. Certainly, we view these goals as agency objectives. Director Warsack, Director Williams before him made it very clear that one of their very important initiatives is to one agency. This is one agency. It's not parks and wildlife and everything else. So that's why you see these in aggregate. This is important across the entire agency, across all of our programs. There are very few of our management actions or projects or initiatives that don't go beyond a divisional border now. So for example, things going on at Summers Beach State Park, there are wildlife considerations there. There are fisheries considerations there. There are law enforcement considerations there. So that's why you see this in aggregate. Vice Chair Mo, my apologies that I thought these materials were in your packet, but again, the board has the opportunity today to either make a motion to approve, they can modify, they can direct the department to revise. Any and all of those things are available to you, Madam Vice Chair, Mr. Chairman.
Okay, the board, we can discuss this agenda item. What does each one of you think here? I mean, Member Mo makes some valid points. It seems to be hard to vote on something when we don't know exactly what that is, but this looks more like just guidelines of where, and some directions of where you're going to go. It's not set in stone of any money or anything, but it's just the direction, in my mind, of where the department wants to go. Hank, can you?
Mr. Chair, that is correct. It's basically an outline of where we're heading and why we're heading that way for the budgets.
Okay.
Mr. Chairman, we have Kathy McLean that wanted to speak, if we could.
No, I'm okay with this. I like the discussion on this, and I am okay with something that's a general enough. I understand. I think it would be pretty difficult for our board to, the 5 of us or 4 of us, we don't want to lose you, Mary, to get in depth enough to learn everything that we need to know on Fish, Wildlife, and Parks budgets and everything in order to make informed decisions. If it's just an overall thing, I'm okay, comfortable with that, a direction.
Thank you, Kathy. Member Mo.
Yes, and it may just be me. My packet doesn't have these in it. And so that's I'm very comfortable with this too. I just didn't see it in my material. So that's my error, I guess.
Mr. Chair, Madam Vice Chair, we are getting them to you, getting copied right now for you. I do not believe they were in the book. Is that correct? They were not, so I apologize for
Okay,
that.
and I hadn't caught it earlier either. I was.
Yeah, I just got them
thinking-
this morning myself, so
Yeah.
I apologize for not being in there. But once again, this is just kind of the goal of where we're headed. And I think once you have it in front of you, it'll make a lot more sense to look at it rather than trying to listen to me read from a bunch of stuff.
Any other questions there from our members? Jody?
Thanks, Mr. Chairman. Are we prepared to move on this now, or do we need to look at the packet in more detail? Or as far as the budget goes, I can understand the wording, but we are one agency. And so I'm okay with that. And as far as the actual numbers on the budget, I think they are what they are.
Okay, well, if there's no more dialogue or questions here, then would someone like to make a motion on the presentation that was given?
Mr. Chairman.
Member Mo.
For the purposes of raising the issue, I move the Parks and Recreation Board approve Fish, Wildlife, and Parks proposed budget for the 2023 legislative session as presented.
Is there a second? Scott, seconds that. Thank you for the motion. It's time to take public comment on the motion. If there's anyone here in Helena that would like to comment, please come forward. Not seeing anybody. Then next we'll take public comment via Zoom. Scott, is there anyone that would like to comment on this issue?
Mr. Chair, I do not see any hands raised in the Zoom portion.
Okay, thanks, Scott. Does the board have any other further questions before voting on the motion? Okay, since there are no more questions for the board, let's vote on the motion. All in favor, say aye.
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 Those opposed, say nay.
Nay.
Okay, so we have 4 ayes and 1 nay. That motion carries. Okay, the next item On the agenda, we have the Summers Beach Interim Development. And that'll be presented by Hope Stockwell of the Fish, Wildlife and Parks Outdoor Recreation Division Administrator. Hope?
Good afternoon, members, Mr. Chair, Director Hope Stockwell, Administrator of the Parks and Outdoor Recreation Division. For the record, in front of you today, your first agenda item is the Summers Beach Interim Development Project. We have seen increased costs. In October 2021, we finalized the acquisition of the Summers Beach property. You had previously in May approved a spending plan for $100,000 in interim amenities such as things to address public safety and sanitation, a parking lot, trash receptacles, porta potties, those sorts of things, some minimal signage and initial trail work to get people through the site to access the park. What we've seen across the board with our costs is things are going up for construction. And so what we now have in front of us is an estimate for these interim amenities of $175,000, so above what you've approved. So we're coming back to you for an increase to request that increase. And we would recommend that you approve $200,000 just as a contingency at this point, barring increasing costs. And Mr. Chair, I'll leave it to you if you have any questions.
Does the board have any questions for Hope?
Mr. Chair and members, if you look in your packet behind the cover sheet, there is a specific list here. So you'll see things related to installation of the parking lot, et cetera, some signposts, steel pipe security gate, et cetera.
Member Loomis?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Could you guys please pull your mics a little closer? Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Hope, one kind of comment question I would have is with, we're living in a time where the prices, inflation, fluctuation, is that a lot of this? And the other question is, and kind of comment, maybe you could just kind of address this and what your thoughts are. When we are looking at projects in the future, obviously you want to nail it down to what the costs are actually going to be, and be able to do the work for that price. So I guess one of the best ways you can get that done at that, smiling over there. If you can, I imagine that if the closer the project, the work hits the ground to the time that the plan comes out, the more accurately we're going to be able to meet those goals. Is that correct?
Member Loomis, I'm going to say yes, but I'm going to turn it over to the Deputy Director who has thought lots more about this piece of it than I have.
Mr. Chairman, Member Loomis. Yeah, so we've been running into this now for 3 years where, we've gotten a project approved for construction by the legislature. We go through that process, and then you have the procurement, the design, the procurement, the bid process. And then we get to bid award, we open the bids and we find out the price is 30% higher than we had budget for, just, costs being what they are. So we've got some ideas on how to hedge against that we're going to be working with the administration on to see if we can find a way to provide some safety valve for those critical projects that we have to advance, even with the increased costs, particularly ones that surround public or employee safety, that there's a way for us to do that. So what we've done where we can is if we have a project come up short, Director Warsek has authorized the use of alternative funds where they're appropriate to get those projects to continue to move. Our Design and Construction Bureau is comprised of a whole bunch of really qualified, really hardworking folks, and they're helping us as well in trying to keep their estimates up with what they see as the trends. But invariably, some we get right, some we get wrong. We had a bid opening for the Miles City Hatchery the other day that they got to within like $50,000, which was on a $1.7 million project. So that was pretty darn good. But then we've had, an office building in Glasgow that we've been trying to build for 3 years that were nearly $2 million over the original budget. So it just depends, but we're aware of the concern. Like you said, Director Warsek's been generous where he can be to keep these projects moving along, but we do have a plan that we're working with the budget office to try and fix this going forward, Mr. Chairman.
Can I follow up?
Thank you, Jody.
I
please.
would think there would be a lot of reluctance on the budget or the legislature to approve budget that's padded to make sure that we've got enough. I mean, so what you're saying is we can kind of estimate some cost increases, but we can only go too far. We got to be careful not to go too far. Then credibility issue with projects being finished with what do you think the cost is going to be?
Mr. Chairman, Member Loomis, yeah, to reopen an old wound of mine, in the 17th session, I found out firsthand what lack of credibility in this room does to the agency. And the Parks Division lost $4 million that year because the department didn't have credibility as it relates to its business practices. So you're exactly right. We've got to do our level best to hit the sweet spot here. But I've also found the legislature through the appropriations process to be reasonable and fair. They understand these same pressures. And I'm confident that we're going to be able to find a solution that works for the administration, will work for the legislature, and still allow us to be responsible with the resources the legislature and the board steward us with.
Thank you very much.
Okay, if we don't have any other questions, would someone like to make a motion on this?
Mr. Chair. Mr. Chairman, I move the Parks and Recreation Board increase the approved amount of interim amenity development at Summers Beach State Park from $100,000 to $200,000.
Okay, did we have a second on that motion? Second. Member Mo seconds that. Thanks for the motion. Now's the time to take public comment on the motion. If there's anyone in Helena that would like to comment, please come forward. Okay. I forgot a part. We have our regional offices here today as well on Zoom. Next, we'll take public comment from the regional office. Or anyone in Region 1 who would like to make a comment?
No comment in Region 1.
Anyone in Region 2 that would like to make a comment? Anyone in Region 3 that would like to make a comment? Anyone in Region 4 that would like to comment?
Chairman Kip, no comments in Region 4.
Thank you. Is there anyone in Region 5 that would comment?
Oh, Chairman, no comments from Region 5, thanks.
Okay, is there anyone who would like to comment in Region 6? Is there anyone in Region 7?
Chairman, no one in 7. Thank you.
Okay. Okay, next we'll take public comment via Zoom. Scott, is there anyone?
Mr. Chair, I do not see any attendees wishing to speak at this time.
Mr. Chairman, I might step in. I received a message that the folks online can't seem to raise a hand. If our tech folks could check that. And I would remind folks online, if you're on the phone, press *9. Otherwise, you should see a raise hand button at the bottom of the screen.
Yeah, all of our settings are normal, so I'm guessing it's on their end if they're unable to raise their hand.
Okay, so
Mr. Chairman, if I could speak to the motion.
please.
I just want to remind the board that the Summers Beach project is a pretty high profile project. And there's been a considerable amount of work into getting it going. And I think this snag is unfortunate, but these things happen. And there's an expectation now that some of the problems that they've been having there, particularly with parking and with amenities and the very things that are being addressed through this agenda item, that they're going to get better. And so I think it's really important that we approve this increase and get this project started on the best possible footing.
Okay. Have any other questions? If not, let's vote on this motion. All in favor, say aye.
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 Any opposed, say nay. Okay, this motion passes 5-0. Okay, the next item on the agenda is the Smith River State Park and River Corridor biennial and administrative rule, which will be presented by Hope.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm here all day. Get to make the joke again. And I'll just let you know, I did receive messages from two separate people who can't seem to find the raise hand button in the settings on the Zoom. We do have a list of the folks who pre-registered. So they did pre-register by agenda item, and we could just call on them as a way of checking. If they're unable to raise their hand, I would presume we're able to let them in and allow them to speak simply by calling on them. Colleen, or I'm sorry, Scott, could you give me a thumbs up on that, just so the folks out in Zoom land know that that's possible?
Yes, we do have that ability. If you could have someone send me the list of people that wish to speak, I can allow them to talk individually if they can't raise their hand.
Okay, I will just call their names, perhaps. Scott, I think that if
that'll
Colleen-
work. Thank you.
Thank you. Sorry for that, members. Next item is the Smith River biennial rule and administrative rule related to this. We're going to walk you through a timeline here. So at your December meeting, you extended the Smith River biennial rule fee, December 2021, extended the biennial rule for 1 year to give us some latitude to work through our rule considerations. We're taking a holistic look within the agency at all use rules, fees, et cetera. And we wanted to ask you specifically for the Smith for this latitude so that we can work through finalizing the updates to our management plan for the Smith, because there are some potential implications for the Smith rule. We have issued the decision notice for the management plan update. It was assigned on February 2nd, and now we're recommending changes to the biennial rule to reflect those management plan updates. And I'll walk through each of those. The other thing that we're doing is we're also recommending striking language in the biennial rule and our administrative rule that pertains to the transfer of a Smith River Outfitters business to reflect some statutory changes that were made in the 2021 session. That portion did not come out of the management plan updates, but it came to light as we were working through this, and it's appropriate to bring to you at the same time. So I'll start first with the things that did come out of the management plan. The first one is management of Camp Baker. A proposal has come forward with the decision notice to allow Camp Baker only for day use, no camping there except during September 1st through November 30th during the hunting season. Originally, as the environmental assessment went out on the management plan proposals, it was contemplated that there would be no camping at all at Camp Baker. There was feedback from the public that, boy, we'd still like to use it during hunting season. And so the decision notice came out with a modified alternative reflecting that. You can find the details on the Camp Baker piece in the draft biennial rule that's in this tab of your binder on page 11, if you'd like to look at that specifically. But we did start limiting Camp Baker to day use during the pandemic, just as a matter of managing people, visitation, sanitation, safety, and it ended up working really well. We accommodated folks with registration and boat camp selection on the phone and online, or pardon me, on the phone. And now we'd look to do that continuing on the phone or online as we work through those pieces. But it worked out really well, and it's something for administrative reasons and for the ease of the public and customer service we'd like to continue. The second piece coming out of the management plan update is the human waste management. This would require, the alternative that we're proposing today is to require all floaters to pack out solid human waste using a self-contained toilet system with disposal near the Eden Bridge takeout. We would work to develop that disposal system during this time. It would go into effect for the 2023 float season. We would have an education period to let people know this is coming. But this is really to address natural and cultural resource impacts and health concerns that we're seeing at the site. Some numbers from our environmental assessment that since 1983, about 1,200 pit latrines have been dug on the Smith. It's an average of about 34 per year in the last 15 years. Takes a lot of work, a lot of person hours. It also sanitation concerns, safety for the groundwater, et cetera. And so that is really an element as we see the rising visitation on the Smith, the rising use. We have an increase in the size of the float trips and also the number of, I lost my train of thought there. I'll have to dig back through my notes. But we have seen an increase in the size of the float groups. And so that raises a concern about how we're going to be able to sustain latrines on the Smith in a realistic way. And so we're moving toward the solid waste pack out system. It's the only permitted river in the contiguous 48 that doesn't require this. Moving on to the third item coming out of the management plan, Smith River fee system. We are proposing a free increase to support the pack out system waste disposal piece. And the operation and maintenance per year is estimated to be about $50,000. We are proposing to increase the fee to support that and cover those costs as proposed. And you'll see this on page 3 of the draft rule. We would propose to increase the application fee from $10 to $15 and the commercial outfitter client fee from $100 to $110 to cover those costs. Just to note that float fees were last increased in 2003 for residents and outfitters and in 2010 for non-residents. And then piece 4 of what's in front of you today relates to the outfitter trip transfers. This did not come out of the management plan, but it's come to light because of a statutory change in the 2021 session that we should go ahead and address now. It appears the legal department is still reviewing the implications of the 2021 statute change, but it appears our current language is in conflict with that. And so we need time to reflect and figure out how we're going to address that in light of the changes. We're going to do this through our commercial use rule holistically for the agency. So it would not come back to you at a future date to put back into the Smith rules if there was language that was later recommended. So just to let you know how we're going to be addressing that. But you'll see that language stricken on page 9 and 10 of the draft rule. And then also just to note, the commission will go through the same process in looking at proposing changes for this administrative rule that's related to this at their April 19th meeting. So you would be doing your side today and the commission will be asked to take that proposal forward from its perspective at April 19th meeting. With that, Mr. Chairman, I'll stand for any questions and stand ready with the public comment list.
Does the board have any questions for Hope? Scott?
Did they talk about increasing the floater fees?
Mr. Chairman and members, in talking with leadership about how much revenue we wanted to generate, we really wanted to cover just the operation and maintenance of the new disposal system if it's implemented with your approval. And so we looked for the best way to cover those costs. We did include some padding so that we're not coming back to you frequently asking you to adjust the fees. The O&M is about $50,000 a year in the first 6 years estimated. And so what we put our fee increase proposal at was for about $60,000 a year in revenue so that we'll have some time and not have to come back frequently to adjust.
Out of skaters were always surprised how low the fee was. I think there's room there.
Okay, any other questions? Jody?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. One comment and a question. One comment that I had is on the management of Camp Baker. I appreciate your efforts to keep it available for camping when it's not overcrowded. You know, instead of just cut it off, we've got a time of the year when it could still be used for camping. So I appreciate your efforts for that. The question I had is the padding that's been added, is your terms too, the increased fees so that we're covered on the new system for maybe several years or however this would go. The extra revenue that may come, in the short term, if we've got a little cushion there, does the extra revenue, does that go into a general fund? Does it stay with parks? Is it earmarked for the Smith?
Mr. Chairman, members, it goes into the general license account because of the way the money is collected. But we keep track, Lena Haberman will keep track of the money that's coming in, the revenue related to that. The intention is we know what we expect the O&M to be, but if something should go awry, if something should need to be replaced suddenly, that we'll have that there as some grace to deal with those situations.
It makes sense to me.
Okay, I've got a question for Hope. There's 4 components to this that we're looking at. The management at Camp Acre, if approved today, that would take effect this season.
Mr. Chairman, members, I'm sorry, I got to refresh myself. Charlie's giving me the nod, yes.
Okay. The human waste management, if approved, would take effect in 2023.
That's correct, Mr. Chair.
Okay. And then the float fees, if they are increased, which seem to be very minimal after 2003, they would take effect this year to start building that revenue for the.
Mr. Chair, it would be next year because we've already had the application cycle for this year.
Okay, so that's. And then the next is the outfitter trip transfer. That how soon will we be acting on that? We have outfitters now that are booking trips. Will that happen fairly fast so that can be implemented this year, or is it something that will be implemented next year?
Mr. Chair, it's a matter of timing. It wouldn't go into effect with your vote today if you were to move it forward because the biennial rule process and also the ARM process. Charlie, give me do you have a timeline in which, do you want to speak to this? Sure.
Members of the board, Chair Kip, Charlie Sperry, Assistant Administrator for the division. You asked about the timeline. So the biennial rule for the Smith and the language that talks about the transfer of a Smith River Outfitters business, and specifically that language talks about the ability to lease trips, launch dates among themselves, the permitted Smith River Outfitters. So that the biennial rule part of it, that when if you choose to move that proposed rule language forward and strike that language, once you come back for your final decision on the biennial rule, then that would go into effect. And Zach Ziffel, who is here, could probably speak to the administrative rule piece, but that is a longer timeline. And that does include, it's a little broader, as in it's pulling that entire paragraph out of the administrative rules. And that would go through a MAPA, Montana Administrative Procedures Act timeline. So if the commission decides to move on that as well at their April meeting, then you're looking at, usually those are about a 4-month process. But ultimately to your question about, and I assumed it was a question about impact or effect, for the Smith River Outfitters. I mean, once this is removed from the biennial rule, in essence, there is no rule speaking to that language for the Smith River Outfitters. And I look to our attorney for any clarification or add on to that. Okay.
Okay. Thank you.
Thank you.
Do we have any other board members' questions?
I just want to make the comment because I served on the group that helped to work this process through. And I want to remind you that it was a very broad-based group that included property owners along the Smith, outfitter, recreation groups, many people that were in staff, many members of the former Smith River Advisory Council. So there were a lot of different perspectives that were at that. And having been involved in a number of these things over the years, I can't think of a group that was more effective in rolling up their sleeves, being engaged, and really truly being collaborative. I thought this was going to be a lot harder sell than it was. I particularly thought the waste management would be difficult, but it was like a no-brainer. The management of Camp Baker and that, although I agree with you that it's good that they've left a little window there, the phrase that I came to think of with a lot of what's happening on the Smith is that we're loving it to death. And I hope we take good care of it because it is such a beautiful thing. But I couldn't more enthusiastically support the motion that I'm about to make when you deem that time is correct, because it really is the product of good work on the part of the agency and on the part of this group that was so broad-based.
Okay, thank you. I don't think we have any other questions, comments. So would someone like to make that motion?
Someone would. I move the Parks and Recreation Board approve the proposed rules establishing Camp Baker as day use only with the September 1 to November 30 exception, requiring human waste pack out using self-contained toilet systems, increasing the Smith River float fees, and striking language pertaining to outfitter trip transfers.
Okay, do we have a second on that? Okay, Scott, second that. Okay, thanks for the motion. We'll take public comment on the motion. Now, is there anyone in Helena that would like to speak? Come up and state your name and who you represent, where you're from, please.
Chairman Kip, members of the board, Director Warsick. My name is Ty Wells. My address is 913 Smith River Road. Some of you probably knew that I was going to show up today. And I represent basically my wife and her sister and their mother, who own the property surrounding Camp Baker on two sides. And actually, to give you a little further history, I won't go into too much. I believe it was 1971, my wife's grandfather sold FWP an easement to allow them to be able to establish Camp Baker. So the family's had a very vested interest for a long time. They've actually owned the property since 1949. We actively ranch on there. I'm a little nervous getting up in front, so please excuse me. But anyway, first off, I do want to point out the Region 4 guys that are sitting up on the screen. They have been instrumental this last year. COVID actually, as an adjacent landowner, was a very good thing. When you guys stopped the camping for the past year because of that, I mean, we have seen huge effects from it as an adjacent landowner. First off, there was overcrowding. People were starting to trespass onto us and camping actually on our deeded property. You go through about 1/8 of a mile of us before you get in there. Foggy conditions, everything. I mean, we just seen a lot of that and it all stopped. The second thing happens that we noticed tremendously is about 11 to 12 o'clock at night. We have no longer had any traffic coming down our little road, as you guys all know, that you've come off the hill. So just to give you a little instance, people would come check in, set up their campsite. They would all go back to town. They would patronize the bars, and then they would all come home at night. Nobody was out patrolling, but I'm just saying that when fences are wiped out, which we had on numerous occasions, all that has stopped. So I want to thank Region 4 guys for doing that. And we've been working hand in hand with them and working on doing some ramp work and some stability projects on the river. And they've been great to work with. So I just want to point that out. But I do have a little concern on the camping during September 1 to is it November 3rd? Excuse me, I got my notes. But anyway, we are a little concerned. We enjoyed the fact that nobody has been down there in some sense. And what concerns us most of all about that is basically that the nice thing about when there is camping and you have floaters, the river rangers have always been there, monitoring what's going on, monitoring the fires, actually preventing trespass. If you know where the second boat ramp is, you know that our fence line, and it's been just recently resurveyed, goes right up next to it. And what we see is tracks, everything when nobody's around there, but when there's river rangers around there, we don't have any problems at all. And so that's a little bit of our concern with the fact that if you go for September, most of the time, if the water's low, the river rangers will have moved out by then. During the normal hunting season, they have the last few years had block management staying in there, which has been nice to have somebody come and go. But if they so choose to not have somebody, we're very concerned about that, especially with one of the biggest issues is the fires. Camp Baker itself is 50 acres, and we surround it, like I said, on two sides, and it wouldn't take long to substantially affect our ranching operation if something should take off. And the fact that it's a very overgrown in there. So we're concerned a little bit on that. And this past year was, we had a fire in the dry range right behind it. They issued evacuation orders. You guys as river rangers pulled out. Us and the county were left there maintaining the line, never came over, thank goodness, but just a concern. And then the second one would be the trespass. I mean, we've seen a lot of that lately, and we're getting actually more and more of it horn hunting out of all things. So I would ask that maybe you consider some of this. It seems like our relationship with FWP and Parks, the Region 4 guys, is getting stronger and stronger. We want to see a ramp, new project put in there to stabilize that bank, continue to do that. We've sold gravel for the roads. I've cleaned the cattle guards. I mean, we're trying to work hand in hand, but we would just appreciate maybe just keeping it a day use only. And maybe if not, make it put some limitations on the time frame, or hopefully maybe staff it. So thank you for being able to comment.
Okay, thank you. Anyone else in the room wants to comment?
Yes. Good afternoon. My name is Doug Haberman. I live here in Helena as well as up in the Sun River Canyon. And I've come a little late to the process, but probably most of you know, I was here at the beginning of this party, part of the original team that developed the first management plan and the Smith River Management Act. And I also dug a few of those pits over the years, along with Russ. We, in our era, we tried to manage with the least lightest touch as possible with floaters. The Smith River management was a big deal. I mean, this is a very quiet meeting compared to the ones that we had back then. I mean, we were trying to limit people's floating. We were reducing the number of people on the river. It was a big deal for FWP to stick its foot in the river management business. But it was obvious it had to be done. We had tremendous problems, we thought back then. Multiple people trying to stay at small campsites like Rock Creek. I can remember 5 camps at Rock Creek, which, if you know the river, is a tiny little place. So we looked at those issues. We analyzed them in the scientific way. We modeled what could happen on the river. We had the same limited land resource or public land resource. But we always tried to, along with the act, as the act says in the management plan, provide for as much opportunity and freedom as possible, protect the natural resources, and resolve the issues when they come up, whether they're scientific or mainly social. And so I've read through the EA and decision notice and other materials, and I'm very confident that the department is meeting the goals of past Smith River management, focusing on specific conflict areas, in this case, the Camp Baker and human waste problems. And so I think this group of folks and these proposals are well thought out, and it's going to take a lot of work on the waste management. That's a big commitment for personnel time as well as capital equipment, but it's probably the right time to do it. And I think most people will comply, just as they have with the bear issues. I just want to throw a few more points again. although again, I think this is well done. It covered much of the issues in the EA. As I read through it, I could just feel those old issues and concerns. And, they're never going to go away. It's something like elk management. It takes constant attention and really good staff, which you have, of course, up in Region 4. A couple things caught my eye, though. There was some mention of closing the river. And I really, in the future, be careful about this sort of thing. Closing our waters is a serious thing. I think most users would rather just see a reduction or some sort of limitation on use rather than complete closure, other than for dangerous situations, that sort of thing. I'm also struck by how much things do change but stay the same. And other than the quieter meeting here, it's again the history of managing that river, and it talks in the EA about natural and cultural impacts, and those are things that always were important to me in my career. But this is really social science. You can't really quantify a lot of issues from bank trampling when it's such a small portion of the riverbank, really. Water quality, you've got 3,000 or 4,000 cattle upstream in a major town. There's a lot of things you can't control on the river, but you can control as you're proposing to manage the floaters. And that's what it is. It's social science. And I want to encourage you all to think about that and keep that in mind. You're managing people, and that's not a bad thing. That's a good thing, especially on the Smith. One other thing, and Administrator Stockwell mentioned it, it's only permitted river in the country without a human waste pack out. And I don't think we should worry about being the only. We're unique in Montana. A lot of those rivers were developed with waste pack out because they're sand-based rivers. A lot of their campsites wash away and reform every year, for instance, on the Colorado or the lower salmon. And so we are a different type of soil than in the Smith. And that's one reason we put those pits in and kept them in for so long, is that river can absorb that. It's not a active desert river like most of the other ones are. But don't be afraid to be the only, and don't be afraid to look ahead and say, here's some things we can do to make this better. It's amazing. The first year we had 237 applications for the permits. So we were able to fill all of them by hand in the Region 4 office there. But, don't be afraid to think outside the box. Think about what's best for Montana. I know several of you have a lot of experience with the river, as well as our agency. So, but I think it's the right way to go, and someday I'll get back on the river again. So thank you very much.
Excuse me, anyone else in the room would like to comment? Yes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, members of the board. My name is Colin Cooney, COONEY, here today on behalf of Trout Unlimited. I was also a member of the advisory board with Vice Chair Mo, and I was also a Smith River Park Ranger from 2014 to 2015. So the Smith River is definitely near and dear to my heart. I won't belabor the point. I think that everything has been said very well. We support the proposal in front of you. We think it was a great process. Really want to thank Fish, Wildlife, and Parks, the folks at the Region 4 office, for such a great process. The management of the river at Camp Baker, and along with the waste management, it's time to change those. I, as a park ranger, dug many of those latrines myself as well, and it actually came to the point where we were having to re-dig old latrines because we were running out of spots to dig. So it's definitely, I know it's a nice thing to have, and some of those latrines have some of the best views in the state. But at the same time, it really comes down to the health of the river, health of the fishery, and we think it's definitely time to make it a pack out. Additionally, in the 2021 session, we worked hard with Fish, Wildlife, and Parks to make sure that money for the scat machine down at Eden Bridge would be there from the corridor enhancement account. Make sure the money was there necessary to put that in. And so we also do support the fee increase. That makes sense because the last thing you want is to have a scat machine that's not working down at Eden Bridge. So a $5, $10 increase, I don't think is a huge issue. I also just wanted to say, after hearing the landowner speak, I think the concerns about having Camp Baker open for camping during the later parts of the season for hunting, I think those are valid. I think that the enforcement would be an issue. And I really don't think that it'd be hard to convince the lead ranger, Nate Close, to go down and spend a couple months down there during the fall to help out with that. I don't think that'd be a big ask for him at all. So finally, and one thing kind of outside of the plan a little bit, and that I just wanted to bring up was the form or the makeup of the Smith River Council or the Advisory Council. I know the plan right now is to disband that council, which I would recommend against at least keeping that council in some way, shape, or form. This is not going to be the last issue that the Smith faces. This is not going to be the last time we need to bring this diverse group of folks together. So it doesn't need to be, like the Smith River Advisory Council would meet 2 or 3 times a year. Maybe that's not necessary, but having this group in some way, shape, or form to talk about issues, to talk about the corridor enhancement account, which is where all the fees go, which has to stay on the Smith River. It's written in statute. I think that's important. So that would just be a comment of mine and something that I would hope the board would recommend as well. And then just finally, on a personal note, I did just want to say that we will miss Vice Chair Mo as well in working with her and are sorry to hear her that she's leaving, but wish her all the best. So thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. So
Mr. Chair, if we could, Board Member McLean has asked to speak.
Thank you. Kathy, go ahead. Kathy, you're muted.
I believe we might have some technical issues there. Mr. Chair, it appears Board Member McLean is having some technical issues and is on the telephone right now.
Okay, then let's move to the regional offices, and then we'll get back to Member McLean. So do we have any comments from Region 1?
Chair Kip, we do not.
Any comments from Region 2?
Chair Kip, no comments in Region 2.
Any comments from Region 3? Okay, any comments from Region 4?
Chair Kip, no comments here.
Any comments from Region 5?
Well, Chairman, no comments from Region 5. Thank you.
Any comments from Region 6?
Chair Kip, there's no comments in Region 6. Thank you.
Okay, any comments from Region 7?
No, sir, no comments. Thank you.
Okay, have we got Kathy? Is she able to speak?
Board Member McLean, you're okay to speak. Still appears we have some microphone issues. She's unmuted, but we're unable to hear her.
Okay, let's see if we can work on that. Let's we can come back there. The next we'll take public comments from Zoom, and we do have one person that pre-registered. Mark.
Mr. Chair, the person is not on Zoom at this time that is registered.
Okay, do you have anybody else?
We did appear to fix the hand raising issue. So if anybody that's on Zoom wishes to speak, they can go ahead and raise your hand now. As a reminder, if you wish to speak and you're attending the Zoom meeting, you can raise your hand now if you wish to speak. Mr. Chair, seeing that there are no attendees raising their hands, I will defer to you.
Yeah, I'd like to circle back to Member McLean. Is she able to speak now?
Board Member McLean, you can go ahead and speak if you can.
Yeah, it doesn't appear to be.
Yeah, Mr. Chair, it doesn't appear that she's able to speak.
Oh, is somebody going to call her in the room?
We will attempt to get a hold of her, yes.
Yeah, let's take a short bathroom break for a couple minutes here.
Kathy, can you hear me? Can you nod your head if you can hear me?
Kathy, this is Scott. If you can, give me a thumbs up if you can hear us and see us.
being overtaken by your constant frustration where they're making messes around the house and not picking up after themselves. And finally, you're sort of like, which is worse? Get them out. Because I'm so tired of picking up after.
They were excited. I was more one of those.
Yeah.
I didn't show, I hope I didn't show it too much.
Yeah. Yeah. And so we had about half stayed outside, half came in, and we kind of just moved back and forth between the two of them. It's good to feel like.
Yep, Ron started breaking.
I'm back.
Hi, Kathy, we can hear you again.
Praise the Lord.
Do you have video by chance?
I can see you, yes.
How about you? Can you turn your video on when you have a
Oh,
moment?
I apologize.
That's okay. All right, we have you. All right,
If we could
thank
get
you.
everybody else to come in and we'll get Guess we have Member McLean hooked up to Zoom again. So Kathy, we'll hand it back over to you then.
No, that's all I needed to talk. As long as I'm live, and I just need to hear what you guys were saying.
Oh,
Sounds great.
okay.
Mr. Chairman, we have a motion on the floor. We've asked for several public comment. I think we were waiting for Kathy for her comment, but if there's any further public comment, I guess it's speak now or forever hold your peace.
Okay, so with no more comments, I'd like to vote on this motion that's on the table. All those in favor say aye.
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 Kathy, we heard you. Any opposed, say nay. Okay, this motion passes 5-0.
And Mr. Chairman, I just would like to thank the landowner, in particular, Ty, for coming and speaking to us. And we are very aware of those concerns and want to hear more if they continue to be concerns.
Thank you, Ty. Okay, the next item on the agenda is the land exchange to increase lake frontage on Lake Mary Ronan State Park. Hope?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, members. Again, Hope Stockwell, Administrator of the Parks and Outdoor Recreation Division. In front of you now is this land exchange at Lake Mary Ronan State Park. This is something that's been talked about in different ways for a few years. Back in 2018, we actually had an environmental assessment on a first proposal with the Sandow family, which has property along the shoreline of Lake Mary Ronan, just north of the park, north of the boat ramp there. And in several years, FWP and the Sandows and their predecessors have talked about some land trade negotiations. And what was first proposed was larger than what comes before you today. It didn't end up coming through, but in 2020, there was an issue that arose regarding legal access for the Sandows to their property. They have been using park property to access theirs because of an obstruction that a neighbor has built on their adjacent property line there. And so that has been an issue that's arisen that they need help dealing with. They were also interested in getting some additional width on their shoreline property so they could install a drain field in case they added a single residential dwelling there. And so when we did a survey, it indicated that the access to their property along with a new boundary fence they had built was encroaching on the park. And so what we bring before you today is the remedy for this situation. We would have an exchange of 0.09 acres of shoreline. That's about 67.41 feet of shoreline. Trade that for 0.117 woodland acres on the northwest side of the park as an exchange. And then also in addition to that, we've negotiated selling a small piece to them for their access, 0.069 acres to resolve that usage issue and then make the new boundary consistent with where the fence line is now. And so some moving parts there with you. You have a copy of a rudimentary map of the site showing that these exchanges, the blue rectangle, the tall one is what they would receive. The green, smaller kind of triangle shape that's more to the south would be the shoreline area that we would receive. It's just adjacent to our existing day use area, which is smallish. And so this would allow us a good opportunity to expand day use opportunities there. And the portion that they're getting is, if you flip a couple of maps back, the chairman asked that we use the map from the webpage so you can see where the trails are, and the exchange would not interfere with any of that trail system there on the northwest part of the park. It's more to the west of that western trail. So just wanting to point that out. If you have any particular questions about the survey or anything like that, Kevin Reckoff from our legal department is here to help answer those questions. He's been shepherding this through. And so with that, Mr. Chairman, I'll stand aside for any questions.
Okay, does the board have any questions for Hope? Okay, discussion here? This looks like it's going to be a good addition for some more lakefront for the state park and might eliminate a little trespassing there on the end of that property. Anybody else?
Mr. Chairman. I move that the Parks and Recreation Board authorize the FWP to proceed with the land exchange and sale with the Sandow family and to approve the proposed exchange and purchase agreement for the purposes of adding public shoreline footage to LMR and resolving a boundary and legal access issue for this park neighbor.
Okay, we have a motion. Anyone that would like to second that?
I would like to second that.
Yes, thank you, Kathy. So we have a motion and a second. The public comment. Anybody in Helena would like to speak? I'd like to move it along a little faster with our regions. If we have someone that would like to speak, could they raise their hand on the Zoom and would that help us move this along faster? Okay. So any of the regional offices that want to speak to this? Okay. Then next, take public comment from Zoom. Scott, have you got anybody?
Mr. Chair, I do not see any hands raised. If anybody wishes to speak, now's the time to raise your hand. Seeing that there are no hands raised, I defer it back to you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Scott. Since there are no more questions for the board, let's vote on this motion. All in favor, say aye.
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 Opposed, nay. Okay, this motion passes 5-0. Okay, the next item is the First Peoples Buffalo Jump State Park Dnrc lease renewal. Hope again, please.
Mr. Chairman, this lease renewal is for 912 acres that we assumed a previous lease for in the last 2 years. And now we're looking to renew that lease under our own application. And so the cost would be approximately $27,000. And just to be clear here, our intention in renewing this lease is that we want to look for a long-term opportunity here at First Peoples with this property, either a perpetual easement of some kind or perhaps fee title interest with DNRC, looking at that so that we can provide some more amenities at the park, some additional cultural education and interpretation there, as well as possibly the addition of a shooting range with an archery focus, but perhaps muzzle loader as well, and maybe some other opportunities. But bringing this forward to you so that we could continue to have that discussion with DNRC about potentially looking for a long-term interest here so that we could work on more amenities for the park, Mr. Chair.
Okay, do we have any questions for Hope? Jody?
Yeah, Mr. Chair. So just to Hope, to be clear, we're kind of dragging our feet a little bit on improvements to this site without having a long-term lease.
Mr. Chairman, members, for the kinds of improvements that we're talking about wouldn't be appropriate probably under the type of lease that we're in. This is a grazing lease that we've secured. And so we'd need to look for a different type of long-term opportunity for the types of improvements that we would be interested in making, something that would guarantee that we could use the site in perpetuity.
Thank you.
But at this time, you're renewing a grazing lease?
Correct, Mr. Chairman.
So how would the parks use the grazing lease?
Mr. Chairman, at this time, we would simply leave it as we look toward a planning process. There could be an opportunity to enter into a pasturing agreement with a neighboring landowner if they wanted to graze on the land for a year or two while we worked on our planning process and determined what was going to move forward in those amenity proposals. But as is, it's okay. We are paying the grazing rate. And so that's all right as long as we're paying the rate.
Okay. Anybody else have a question? Okay, we get a motion from a
Mr.
board
Chairman,
member.
I move the Parks and Recreation Board approve the 10-year lease between Fish, Wildlife and Parks and Department of Natural Resources and Conservation.
You'll need a second for that.
A second.
Mr. Chair, thank you.
Okay, Jody, thank you. We'll take public comment at this time. Is there anybody in the room who can comment on this? Okay. Anybody in the regional offices that would like to comment, please raise your hand. Not seeing any, I don't believe.
We do not have anybody from the regional offices raising their hands.
Okay. Then the next we'll take public comment from Zoom. Have you got anybody?
At this time, no. I just want to remind attendees on Zoom, if you wish to speak, please raise your hand now. Seeing that I have no attendees wishing to speak, I hand it back to you, Mr. Chair.
Thanks, Scott. Does the board have any further questions before we vote? Okay, since there's no more questions, let's vote on the motion. All in favor, say aye.
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 Any opposed, say nay. Okay, this passes 5-0 as well. Okay, next item is the Lone Pine State Park Archery Range acquisition. Hey, Hope, can you go there?
Certainly, Mr. Chairman, and still accurate. Pine is a tree, so, you know. Members, this is an acquisition that is adjacent on the west side of the existing Lone Pine State Park, adjacent to our archery range that we already have. We're seeking this acquisition of 9.3 acres to expand that archery range. It would include about 2,000 feet of new trail and 6 target locations that are proposed. But the current range self-registration is telling us that use has increased about 30% in the past 3 years. There is an active program in the area schools with the National Archery in Schools program that uses the site. And so this is something we want to support and allow for expanded opportunity at Lone Pine. We also have an appropriation from the 2021 legislature to support this with Pittman-Robertson grant funding for shooting range development. And so the cost of doing this would come out of that. It's a pretty minimal cost, about $9,000 to make the improvements necessary once the acquisition occurs. And so the acquisition itself, with all the fees, I think it was around $180,000 total. And that is what's in front of you today, members.
Okay. Does any of the board members have any questions for Hope or any of the other department? I do for Brian Swartz. Brian, are you available?
Chair Kip Bryan's not here, but I can cover in his place. I'm the regional manager, park manager.
Okay, I appreciate that. On the draft environmental analysis or assessment here, on that front page, there's a Zinks elk target. That's a field tip target. And the rules for the state parks is they are field tip, no broadheads, so no silhouettes. You're using this type of target. Who's taking care of these targets and who's paying for them? Do you have a archery club that's assisting here or what?
Chair Kip, members of the board, we already have an archery range maintenance program built into our operation there. So the park manager and maintenance staff have maintained those. Actually, for about 30 years now, we've been maintaining an archery range there. We do get some volunteer assistance from time to time. And the archery range, you're correct, is a field point only range. And so we've had pretty good luck with folks abiding by that requirement.
Okay, are you using these Zincs targets?
We are. We started using those a few years ago. They're quite durable and weather resistant and pretty cost effective compared to what we had previously.
And quite large and safe for a errant shot, I would think as well.
Chair Kip, yes, we feel that they're very safe, and we've located them, of course, with appropriate backdrops, anticipating that potential for an errant shot.
Thank you. Anybody else have a question? Okay, one of the board members like to make a motion then.
I'll move that Parks and Recreation Board approve the Lone Pine State Park acquisition and archery range development proposal.
Thank you, Scott. Do we have
Second.
And Mary is second. Do we have anyone in the room that would like to comment? Seeing none, I'll ask, do we have any people from regional office that would like to comment? Are you seeing any, Scott?
Mr. Chair, we have Jake Schwaller who wishes to speak via Zoom.
Okay. Thank you. Go ahead, Jake.
Mr. Chair, members of the board, thank you for your time today. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Thank you. So my name is Jake Schwaller and I represent the Montana chapter of Backcountry Hunters and Anglers. Montana BHA is fully supportive of the archery range expansion and the creation of the Big Arm unit and Flathead. I know that's the next one here, and Lone Pine State Park. Our Flathead area members are looking for ways and places to help hone their skills and continue Montana's long and storied bow hunting tradition. These archery ranges will provide incredible opportunities for hunters and archers, and it will be an ideal use of PR dollars. So thank you for your work on this. We really appreciate it.
Thank you. Any other Zoom comments?
Mr. Chair, we do not see any more hands raised. If anybody else wishes to speak, raise your hand now. Seeing no hands raised, we hand it back to you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Scott. Does the board have any further questions before we vote on this motion? Okay, since there are no more questions from the board, let's vote. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed, say nay. Okay, this motion passes 5-0. The next item is the Big Arm Unit Archery Range Development. Hope, would you?
Mr. Chairman, members, this Big Arm Archery Range development is a new archery range proposed at Big Arm State Park, which is on the unit of Flathead Lake there on the southwest side of Flathead Lake. The archery range, if you look at the map that's included, would be on the west side of the highway and away opposite the main entrance there. There are anticipated we would put in a parking lot, a kiosk, a vault latrine, and then have a roughly 30-foot by 15-foot shooting line with some lockable storage, perhaps, and practice area. The archery range trail would end up with about 12 shooting stations, and one of them would be anticipated to include an elevated shooting station to include that opportunity. There's been discussion, questions from some members about safety in the area with surrounding property. And again, this would be done in such a way to ensure that the backdrops are built and the distances are appropriate to protect anyone from errant shots. But the sight lines, Beth Shoemates looked at some of the work, and she's an archer herself, and she thinks the sight lines are solid in terms of safety that are being proposed. This project is approximately $320,000 to $415,000 to complete, and there's a range there because of the alternatives. You'll see here in the packet, we have alternative B, which is our proposed action. And if you look at the environmental assessment that's included in your packet on page 7, it shows a map that shows the existing, or pardon me, the proposed trail for the range, but then lays out the different alternatives for where the parking could be under alternative B, C, and D. And so I'd like to walk through those with you just so you understand that this relates to the range of costs. But what we want to do is, in that picture on page 7, have the parking lot across from the main park entrance, and then have the range you see with the red trail there dashed. But this requires an approval from MDT to have that ingress into this new parking area. And so if we're not able to achieve that, another alternative is to seek alternative C, which has an ingress a little further to the south and would include this entrance road. To achieve that, that also requires MDT approval. If that didn't come through, alternative D has us adding a parking area on the east side of the highway. And then there's an existing tunnel under the highway and trail that would be used to get access to the archery range. So we kind of have all of our bases covered here, depending on what could happen with that MDT approval process. But what we'd like to do is alternative B. And I guess with that in mind, as you work on your motion, the motion specifically references alternative B, and I would suggest maybe we be more generic with it if you decide to move forward with this, so that it's simply to proceed with the development of the public archery range at Big Arm, period, end of sentence, so that that leaves us flexibility and no question that if we needed to pivot from alternative B to a different alternative, we could. Your role in this, though, is approving the amount of the expenditure that's occurring, because it's more than $50,000 with these improvements, Mr. Chair.
Okay. Question, Hope. You need some approval from the Department of Transportation on some of these. Have you been in dialogue with them?
Mr. Chair, I'm going to turn to Dave Landstrom in Region 1 to talk about that piece of it.
Chair Kip, members of the board, yes, our design and construction folks have been in contact with MDT out of the Kalispell office. And the last word I heard is that the preferred alternative is actually looking like a good potential. So I think we're close to having what we need from the Department of Transportation.
Okay, thank you. Any other questions for Hope or department?
Mr. Chairman, so it's looking like the proposed or the preferred alternative has a good chance. And the motion that we have here could remain the same.
Mr. Chairman, Member Loomis, I would still say be more generic, just to give us the flexibility. When I talked with Zach Zipfel about it earlier today, he said, in reality, your authority covers the expenditure occurring and giving us authority to expend, and we're proposing up to about $415,000. Really, your authority does not lie in which alternative is selected. So it might be a wash even if you did mention alternative B specifically in that regard, but.
Okay, any other questions? We'll need a motion on this, and we'll need someone to clean it up a little bit for us.
I think this does it, Mr. Chairman. I move that the Parks and Recreation Board authorize FWP to proceed with the development of a public archery range at the Big Arm unit of Flathead Lake State Park.
I second.
Thank you. And then Jody seconds that. With any public comment in this room? Any comment from the district or from the region offices? Not seeing any, Scott?
We do not have any from the regional offices.
Okay, thank you. So then do we have anybody, any general public on Zoom that would like to comment?
Yes, Mr. Chair, we have 5 people, the first being Kobe Gerke.
Okay.
Kobe, go ahead.
Mr. Chair, members of the board, I on this, I must have accidentally clicked that box.
Okay. Next person would be Angie Grove. Angie, you can go ahead.
Thanks, Scott, member chair. Like Kobe, I might have checked the wrong box, although I could have checked every box on the agenda today. So as long as I'm here, I'll comment on it. I think this is a great opportunity and a great expansion to the park in that region, and I encourage the board to support this effort. Thank you.
On my list, I'm seeing just one person to Zoom, and that's Jake.
Yes, Mr. Chair, I'm also looking at the meeting people that signed up. We had 3 more people, but only one hand is raised, and that's Jake Schwaller.
Jake, go ahead, please.
All right, Jake, you are on. Go ahead. Jake, if you can unmute yourself.
All right, can you hear me now?
Yes.
Yes, we can.
Okay, Mr. Chair and members of the board, again, I'm with Montana Backcountry Hunters and Anglers, and you've got our full support on this one. We're very excited to see this project go forward. We look forward to your vote on it. Thank you.
Any others, Scott?
Once again, anyone that's attending via the Zoom webinar, please raise your hand if you wish to speak. Seeing no other hands raised, I give it back to you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Scott. Could I ask the vice chair to repeat her motion?
I move that the Parks and Recreation Board authorize Fish, Wildlife and Parks to proceed with the development of a public archery range at the Big Arm unit of Flathead Lake State Park.
Okay, that was a motion. We had a second. No more questions from the vote from the board. Then let's vote on this one. All in favor, say aye.
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 Any opposed, say nay. Okay, this passes 5-1. Okay, the next item is the endorsement of the Lower Yellowstone River Corridor Zero Land Site Acquisition. Hope, will you present that?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Members, I'm here today with the start of a very exciting project in eastern Montana along the Lower Yellowstone River Corridor. This is something that a citizen group had been working on for some time. It came into a new stage after the 2021 legislature pledged a $4 million appropriation to it. The appropriation was to help look for opportunities to improve access, habitat conservation, help with economic development possibilities along the Lower Yellowstone corridor. And so the department, with the sponsorship of Governor Gianforte, convened a 12-member public group between August and November last year. They made their recommendations for the department's work with this money, looking at opportunities. They went out on the land, talked with some landowners, looked at what was possible. looked at the pinch points in access. This is the whole stretch is between Hysham and the North Dakota border, and we do have gaps in access along there. We have existing FASs and WMAs, but there are some long stretches where even 30 miles and more, there are no access points public. And so we are bringing forward 4 acquisition proposals, 2 to you today. We brought 2 to the commission in February in sort of a joint project here. The 2 in front of you today, the first one is the Zero site. It is a piece of state land in Prairie County. It's 10 to 20 acres, depending on what we might want to do there and look for with DNRC on this. But the committee has recommended that we look to purchase a long-term easement so that the site can be developed more as an access site. This wouldn't necessarily be a traditional fishing access site. It might be river recreation, a recreation access site. Names are to be determined as we work through this concept of managing recreation along the corridor as a whole. We're going to be engaging in multi-level planning processes as we take this and move it forward. But these acquisitions in front of the commission and board now are really the first step. And so at the Zero property, you can already get onto the property from the river, but what the committee is recommending is that you seek that long-term easement with DNRC and then also seek an easement or fee title purchase with an adjacent private landowner so that we can get road access into the property. And then we'd be looking at potential opportunities to add a parking area, a concrete boat ramp, and a latrine. The real benefit at this site is that the only other public access to the river in this area is upstream on the north side of the Yellowstone at Bonfield Fishing Access Site. I don't know if anyone's been there, but I'm told that that travel over 3 miles of road is a little rough getting there, and there's a really narrow bridge. So you're limited as to what sort of equipment and vehicles you can take back in there. So this is seen as really enhancing access in the area. If you take a look at the maps further back here, it's between let's see, Miles City and Terry, if I'm recalling that correctly. I'm sorry, I'm having a sudden brain freeze. South of Terry. And so looking for your endorsement today, we've done some initial work looking at the site. The committee has made this recommendation, but now if we want to move forward, we need to get into the nitty-gritty of working with the landowner on what's possible and with the DNRC on what's possible with them. And so today's endorsement is simply that allows us to go forward and do due diligence on the site. And then we would come back to you if things move forward in a successful way to bring you a final proposal and let you know how that has shaped up and shook out. Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. Any questions for Hope? Member Mo?
Just a process question in terms of it looks like we're saying, go ahead and look into, I mean, so somewhere down the line, you're going to come back and say, here's what we recommend. And this is, okay.
That's exactly right, Madam Chair, or pardon me, Madam Vice Chair. And so I think the other thing that's important to mention, I talked with Member McLean about this on the phone the other day, due to other work that and proposals that have happened in Eastern Montana, some landowners are concerned that what we're seeking to do would somehow have a component that would restrict what they can do on their property or in the river. And what we're seeking here would not have any such restrictions. There's nothing that goes along with this that would in any way restrict any landowner work. So I just want to make that very clear as you think about this.
I have a question about the 12-member Citizen Advisory Committee. Can you give us an idea of what kind of a makeup that committee was?
Sure can, Mr. Chairman, and I can even tell you who was on it. But it was a cross-representation. They were looking for local folks with an eye toward, landowners, users, recreationists, also at tourism components. I just got to get to the right page in their report. My apologies. Thought it was on the report. You know what? I know who can tell you. She's going to make public comment. Angie Grove, who chaired the effort. I'm sorry, the member list is not in this report I have with me. It's in my other materials back at the office. I apologize, but I'm sure Angie could help you do that. I know that she's there, and then I believe we have another member of the committee, or at least 2 perhaps, who want to make comment today, so they can help fill you in.
And Angie was a past chair of this committee.
She was, and we
This
have
board.
continued to use her in different ways, and this was one of those ways with this Lower Yellowstone project.
Okay, thank you.
Mhm.
Anybody else have questions?
Mr. Chair, Board Member McLean would like to speak.
Thank you. Chairman Kip and members of the board, and all present. This of course is in my area, and I've spent a great deal of time talking to many people about it, which is important. But from my perspective, considerations always must be made both for the landowners as well as the recreationists. In a recent conversation with a landowner in this area, his concern was that people simply don't realize the distance in eastern Montana, which distance is big, between the landing sites, and they may need to come onto landowner property due to not having proper hydration or possibly other emergency needs. This is, of course, really a real situation. And of course, he mentioned trash getting on to the lands. My family are also landowners, and boy, do we understand that issue, as well as the issue of people not staying on roads or respecting our land. I can tell horror stories of gates being left open, litter, and so on, and even a cow that was shot by buckshot. Not cool. But we still choose to not close our lands, and have certainly, but we have had to spend far too much time and effort patrolling, which is very sad. However, I've given this a great deal of thought, and I believe that we can all play well in the same pool if we go about solutions like you've done. And I would like to take this time to commend the team that was working on the project. This team has tried to seek solutions to any potential issues and that's to be applauded. If the sites are chosen and chosen well, additional access sites we won't have those long stretches in between where people get off and come to the local farmer for help as much. They'll have access in and out a little better rather than having to go 70 miles upstream. Anyway, that's just my thought on this, and I really appreciated Hope for speaking to the fact that this is not limiting the farmers' use of continued use of what they're done with the river. Not at this point. That's all. Thank you.
Mr. Chair, just wanted to let you know Angie Grove is available via Zoom if you guys have questions.
Yes, Angie, if we could hear from you, would you talk to us about the makeup of that committee?
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you, Hope. You did an excellent job of providing an overview of this process. Yes, this committee was a pretty amazing committee. We had very engaged landowners. We had community leaders from both ends of the river corridor, starting at Hysham through Sydney. We had sportsmen's groups, we had conservation districts, we had irrigation district representation, and most of course, business members. I could name them all 12 off for you if you'd like, or did you just want to know representation?
Just the representation. That was just my question. And I'll go back to the board and we'll see if we can get a motion here, and then we'll ask you to comment at some point. Scott?
Absolutely.
Yeah, we will. But we need to get a motion on the table.
Do you want to make the motion?
Kathy, do you want to make this motion? Oh, she's.
Yes, I'd be happy to make the motion that we move forward with considering this.
Okay.
I'll second it. Oh, go ahead. Doesn't matter.
Okay, so the motion is to move forward with this acquiring interest in the zero property and adjacent land. Correct?
I think that at this point, if I would call this a friendly amendment, Kathy, but it's
Yes.
important to note that we are simply endorsing the effort to move forward.
Thank you.
Okay, and a second to that? Okay. Thanks for the motion. We'll take public comment. Anybody in the room to comment? Anybody from the regional offices, please raise your hand.
Mr. Chair, we do not have anybody raising their hand for the regional offices.
Okay, so then next would be just the public on Zoom, and it looks like we've got a half a dozen people there.
We do. We have 3 people. The first was Noah Marion. Noah, you go ahead.
Hey, can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Great. Thank you, Mr. Chair, members of the board. For the record, my name is Noah Marion. Last name is spelled M-A-R-I-O-N. I'm the state policy director for Wild Montana. Our organization is one of the members of the Lower Yellowstone River Committee, and I was fortunate enough to serve on the advisory committee that Ms. Grove and Ms. Stockwell were just discussing with you all. So, you know, while the easily accessible upper reaches of the Yellowstone are some of the most popular recreation areas in the state, the Lower Yellowstone, as folks have mentioned, can be harder to access despite its really stunning scenery, exceptional wildlife habitat, amazing cultural and historic resources, and really vast recreation potential. In 2019, this group of Eastern Montana community leaders, landowners, business organizations, economic development experts, and nonprofit conservation and recreation groups came together to form the Lower Yellowstone River Coalition with the shared goal of improving public access and recreation infrastructure, conserving wildlife habitat, and in turn fostering economic opportunities for communities along the Lower Yellowstone. And ultimately, by investing in this recreation infrastructure and public lands along the river east of Billings and east of Hysham, actually, the group really hoped to boost the quality of life for communities along the river, improve that public access, protect this amazing wildlife habitat, attract more visitors, and strengthen Eastern Montana's economy. Currently, over 30 city councils, county commissions and mayors, landowners, economic development and tourism organizations, and conservation and recreation groups, and a large group of state legislators from all across the partisan spectrum have supported the Lower Yellowstone Coalition's proposal. So we support both proposals under consideration today and would point out that these proposed acquisitions were high priorities in the advisory committee's recommendations, which were submitted to the department last December. This is a really exciting step towards realizing the vision articulated by the advisory committee and by the Lower Yellowstone River Coalition. And we just want to thank the department staff from Region 7 all the way up to the director's office for working really hard to prioritize this effort. And we would urge the board to endorse these proposals as well. Thanks for the time.
Thank you, Noah.
The next person in line would be Jake Schwaller. Jake, go ahead and talk.
Mr. Chair and members of the board, thank you again for your time with the Backcountry Hunters and Anglers. I actually am the Eastern Montana board member, so this is in my neck of the woods, more so than Flathead region. I am very excited about this. I'm so happy to hear about the work that's been done. And on behalf of our 3,000 members, you know, we really full-throatedly support this one. Access for sportsmen and women is very limited, as has been mentioned here along the lower part of the river. And we really support these efforts to provide the public access opportunity and to mindfully develop these state parks here with an eye towards conserving this valued habitat. You know, we've got the longest undammed river in the lower 48. So far, so much of the recreation is on that upper reach, but we're excited that we can have this down on the lower part too. Thank you.
All right, the next person in line is Angie Grove. You can go ahead and speak, Angie.
Thank you, Scott. Thanks, Chair Kip, also, and board members. Again, for the record, my name is Angie Grove, Grobe, and as pointed out earlier, I was the chair of the Citizens Advisory Committee. And I think everybody speaking before me has done a great job of highlighting the process and the priorities here. A couple of things I'd like to kind of point out earlier when I spoke about the board membership. One critical area I forgot to touch on was tourism and visitor perspective. We did have Brenda Moss, the Southeast Tourism representative on the committee, and it's the first parks planning effort I had been involved in that actually had tourism at the table. And I just want to say, I think it really helped us broaden our perspective in it and look at the visitor amenities and make sure that we looked at a broader vision as we started making recommendations to the department. I also would like to highlight some comments I have from Christine Whitlatch. Christine was a key member of the Lower Yellowstone Coalition. She did a lot of community outreach and really fostered the efforts to get community support for this. She has pointed out that there was overwhelming community support from Hysham to Fairview. The communities are very committed to having economic development that allows them to work collaboratively rather than compete against each other. And they want to see visitors plan to visit the region, not just drive through it. It's one of Christine's favorite topics, so I wanted to make sure that was in there. She also has pointed out that by providing predictable access points, it also will help protect and honor the landowner use throughout the corridor. The unexpected impact from the landowner's perspective is recreational users that may inadvertently use their private property. And by coming up with predictable public access points, we can hopefully prevent that from happening in the future or help protect the private property along the corridor. And I think that's something that the planning committee was very committed to in honoring the historic uses, particularly the focus on the historic and cultural, as well as the agricultural uses in this corridor. So I think those are the main things. I could, of course, talk about this for a long time and would be happy to with anyone that wants to call me. And I would be happy to answer any questions. And I certainly urge your support for this effort. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. The next person in line is Kobe Gerke. Go ahead and give it to you.
Hello. Hello, Chairman Kip, members of the board. My name is Kobe Gerke. I'm the executive director of the Montana State Parks Foundation. I just wanted to without getting too far ahead of ourselves, I wanted to express the support of the Montana State Parks Foundation for this proposal, allowing FWP to further pursue and evaluate the opportunities at both Powder River Depot, which comes up next in the agenda, I realize, and the Zero River Access Site. The State Parks Foundation intends to further engage in this effort in partnership with FWP in order to raise private funds for the development of amenities at potential state park sites along the Lower Yellowstone River corridor. Our belief is that your opinion for this initial proposal is a step in the right direction for a much larger effort in southeastern Montana. And to comment on comments from Hope Stockwell earlier, the Bonfields River access point is very difficult to get to. As a teenager growing up in Miles City, Montana, we loved that place because of its difficulty to access, particularly across the old railroad trestle. It was a place that Custer County Sheriff didn't often know. I can attest that more river access, especially on the south side near I-94, is much needed. So we appreciate your support for this and look forward to your vote. Thank you.
Thank you.
Mr. Chair, we do not have any more people that wish to speak, so I hand it back to you.
Thanks, Scott.
Mr. Chair, just a quick comment. I wanted to say that upon receiving this report from this group, I was totally amazed with the work they put into it and how well it was done. And I also brought it to my one-on-one with the governor, and he was likewise excited about it and has a lot of commitment to getting this done and is very excited about this whole issue. So I just wanted to make sure that the board was well aware of that. Thank you.
Okay,
I too am very excited about it. I do have a couple of questions about the whole package, and not questions so much as just something to raise to get into your kind of thinking. And one is, what creature is this? We're the State Parks Board, and is this a state park eventually? Is this a new thing? Can you address that, Hope?
Mr. Chairman, members, I think the best word we could use is a hybrid. There was discussion early in the advisory committee of a concept of, do we do a corridor-wide state park? That was kind of walked away from and backed up from for different reasons. But I think it's going to be a hybrid. It's, as I said, we don't know yet what we're going to call these sites. Not though traditional fishing access sites. It's going to be something a little different than that. Recreation with a broader focus. And so we'll be working through that as we work on our planning process. I'm going to talk a little bit more about the planning process here at the end of the meeting as part of that wrap up. But it's going to be a new thing.
Okay. I just trying to fit it into a category, and I'm unable to do it. And I imagine there are management and perhaps statutory things that you'll have to address. The other is that I sort of don't like dealing with them separately, because they seem to be so overlapping in the success of the project. I understand that you need to do that for the purposes of looking into specific things, but the sooner that you can weave them into something that is a little, because one of the things I worry about is that we get way down the road on the cunningly named zero piece of property, and it hinges on something that's earlier, and so how they all interrelate is helpful to my thinking about the whole project.
Madam Vice Chair, I think what I'll go ahead and say is elaborate a little bit more as how we're looking at this holistically. So we have a consistent planning team that's been amassed on staff internally, both within the headquarters and regional staff, so that we will be the consistent ship as we move down the channel together, keeping the various pieces in mind. We have the rec folks involved, we have fish folks involved, wildlife, maintenance, the visitation side of things. So we're trying to keep all of the perspectives right in the center of it so that we're not losing sight of anything. And as part of the things going to the commission, for instance, there's the Wildcat Bend property. That one has more of a habitat preservation bent to it because the money is, while for increased access, also for increased habitat conservation. And so because of the statutory requirements for the commission, that piece is going in front of them, for instance. So there will be a bit of walking together and awkwardly. We're going to learn some things as we go through this new process because we haven't quite done anything like this before. But that gives us this really great blank slate to just think about things in an entirely different way and think about what's possible and not be beholden to what we've done in the past.
Any other questions from board members? Okay, well, then I think it's time to vote on this motion. All in favor, say aye. Aye.
Aye.
Any opposed, say nay. Okay, this passes. And the next item is the endorsement of the Lower Yellowstone River Corridor Powder River Depot land acquisition. Hope, can you get us through that?
Yeah, so members, this is in that same project, the Lower Yellowstone, a different recommendation. This is at a site sort of in the middle of the corridor that we're calling the Powder River Depot. It's a group of parcels in between Miles City and Glendive. And it is an opportunity to really look at an interesting mix of possibilities. The advisory committee, same one, talked about, although they backed away from the concept of naming the whole corridor as a state park, could you have still a state park component to the corridor, perhaps a multi-unit one akin to Flathead Lake, where we have multi-units around the lake, And they would suggest maybe there you could do a 3-unit state park within the corridor, and this Powder River Depot presenting an opportunity to have a middle anchor where there's a lot of history and heritage and cultural significance at this site. As noted in the cover sheet, there is tribal and military history there occurring before and after the Battle of the Little Bighorn. There's also historic stage and range rider stations there. And so there's really some really tangible stories to tell there that could make it a great anchor, say, for a visitor center to welcome people into the Lower Yellowstone corridor and direct them on where to go next in their journey. It's a combination of opportunities there that's both private and state and federal. And so it could be anything from 45 to 700 acres, depending on how things shake out. And there's going to have to be a lot of conversations with landowners about what's possible and what makes sense. And so depending on how those move forward, that would shape what might happen at this site. But it is a high priority site. The highest of the 4 in terms of how the scoring matrix came out that the advisory committee put together and our staff applied to the proposals. So this is a big kahuna as part of these 4 proposals coming forward. They're all very important, but this one represents a kind of a more unique opportunity, more in that traditional state park possibility that you might think of. And so with that, Mr. Chair, I open it to questions.
Does the board have any questions for Hope?
Just the comment that I'm always so interested in the cultural and the historic pieces of it. And so I asked for a little more information on that. And this really does have incredible potential for, a full day instead of just going to the battle site of the Little Bighorn battle, of seeing what happened before and afterwards, and getting a whole experience of that area as opposed to one stop in a very crowded place. And the railroad and the mail postal kind of history is also really rich. So it's really an exciting potential center of this project.
Kathy, do you have anything you?
I am also very excited about this project. If any of you have been to this area or if you have not been there, please come. Let me know when you're coming. I'd love to show you around.
Okay. There are no more questions. Would someone like to make a motion on the presentation?
Your
Chairman, go ahead. Chairman Kipp and board members, I would make a motion to accept and support the proposed Lower Yellowstone River Coalition Powder River Depot land acquisition.
Okay. Do we have a second?
I'll second it.
Okay. A motion and a second. Thanks for the motion. Let's take public comment. Anybody in this room need to comment? Don't see anybody. Anybody in the regional offices that would like to comment?
Mr. Chair, there does not appear to be anyone from the regional offices that wish to speak.
Okay, and then next we'll take comments from the public via Zoom, and it looks like we have a half a dozen people again.
The first person is Noah Marion. Noah, go ahead and speak.
Mr. Chair, members of the board, again, Noah Marion here. Last name is Marion, State Policy Director for Wild Montana, member of the Lower Yellowstone River Coalition as well. I won't repeat what I said for the last agenda item, but I would just ask you to consider those comments for this proposal as well. And I'll just say that this site is one of the pieces of this project that I am personally most excited about. As folks have mentioned, there's just really terrific cultural and historic storytelling and educational opportunities And Terry itself, that area is just an incredibly stunning landscape with a lot of untapped potential. And this can be a really great benefit for the region. So really excited to see this project. And thanks again to the department staff who have worked really hard to get it to this point. And we would urge your approval as well. Thank you.
Thank you. The next person wishing to speak is Jake Schwaller. Jake, you have the floor.
Again, members of the board and Mr. Chair, thank you for hearing us on this one. Montana Backcountry Hunters and Anglers supports this. I won't repeat what I said in the last one as well, but we're very excited about this. There's a lot there. There's a lot of wildlife that doesn't really get the press in these places that the western half of the state does. But there's catfish down there, and there's some other species that we think could really benefit from having people out there on those rivers. So we're excited about that. Thank you.
Thank you. The next person that wishes to speak is Angie Grove. Angie, go ahead.
Thank you, Scott, and thank you, Chairman Kip. I won't reiterate what I said earlier, but I would emphasize what Hope and Noah had pointed out. This was by and far the most supported site for the entire advisory committee. It's just got all the elements there. I think one thing that hasn't necessarily been highlighted, I'd like to point out is the fisheries opportunities on this location should change significantly with the changes currently occurring at Intake Dam. So I think there is certainly sportsmen's groups that are going to embrace this as well. And as Noah pointed out, the Terry area has amazing components that could really help outdoor recreation and economic development, which were, of course, our focuses. And I'd just like to follow up with what Kathy, Member McLean, said is definitely go visit this site. If you go, call me. I'd love to go take you and have a burger at the Roy Rogers. And maybe we could stay at the Kempton Hotel. It's truly a unique experience. So, and we will go to the Evelyn Cameron Museum. I will insist upon it. So I hope you can move this forward, and I'm most excited about this site. Thank you for your time.
Thank you. If there's any more attendees that wish to speak via Zoom, please raise your hand. Mr. Chair, seeing that there are no more people that wish to speak, I hand it back to you.
Okay, does the board have any further questions of Hope before we vote? Okay. Let's vote on this motion. All in favor, say aye.
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 Any opposed, say nay. Okay, the motion passes 5-0. Thank you, Hope.
Mr. Chairman, point of personal privilege. You kept us on schedule. I didn't think we had a prayer. I was getting ready to make a motel room during the break. Good job.
I don't know how that happened. Okay, the next item on our agenda is informational updates. The first informational item is the 2018-19 State Agency Biennial Report. Hope, would you give that presentation?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And just a correction, we're actually looking at the 2020-2021 report. It was a mistype on your agenda. Sorry about that, but you do have the right report in your binder. And my hat's off to Dr. Rachel Recken, our Heritage Program Manager, who assembled this and really leads the work for what has been the Parks Division and now the Parks and Outdoor Recreation Division in working at our state parks and preserving the important cultural and heritage resources there. Just some highlights from the report to walk through with you. We have 359 cultural resources within our state parks that are identified, and this includes pre-contact and post-contact sites. So there's a wide variety. This report, which was required by the 2011 legislature, they implemented it at that time. It's known as the SB 3 report because it was Senate Bill 3 that required this. So if you ever hear that, that's what we're talking about. But we're required to come every 2 years and give you a summary of the heritage work that the division has been doing. And I'm going to focus today on the state parks pieces that Rachel has worked on. We also have this same requirement for our FAS and WMA properties, and Bardell Mangum at our Design and Construction Bureau has been responsible for those, although we're in the process of changing that in an exciting new way, which is that the director is reallocating resources to the work so that we can take that off design and construction's plate and allow them to focus just on getting capital projects implemented. And they'll still be with an eye toward heritage and cultural resource preservation, but we're going to hire a second Rachel Reckon to provide that, that focus and that ability, that requirement that we have the State Historic Preservation Office for the educational background to sign off on projects, et cetera, and do survey work for us. So we're super excited about that. That news is new in the last couple of days. So just letting you know, we have big things happening with heritage preservation in the division. As the report lines out, it focuses on the status, condition, and stewardship of about 40 of the cultural resources that we focus on because of their determined significance. And of those 47 are National Historic Landmarks. I would like to note that there are only 24 National Historic Landmarks in Montana. We have 7 of them in state parks, so there's a big responsibility there. We also have 11 cultural resources within state parks that are listed with the National Register of Historic Places. So a lot of great history here. 28 of our sites are post-contact and 12 are pre-contact. So they have everything ranging from at the pre-contact sites, campsites, rock shelter occupations, buffalo jumps, pictographs and petroglyphs. At the post-contact sites, you see things like at Bannock, where lots of structures that were put up, or landscape features that were noted by the Lewis and Clark expedition, trading post, historic campsites, and the like. So really a broad mix of things that we're working with here and responsible for. Table 2 of the report summarizes the integrity and the condition of each of these significant cultural resources. So I want to point you to that if you'd like to look more specifically in your area. But some heritage highlights are noted on starting on page 4 in each of the regions. I'll just pick a couple out. There's a nice array for you to look at. But in Region 1, that new management plan in development for the Flathead Lake Islands, this includes Cedar Island and Logan Marshall Homestead. There's been a concerted effort in Region 1 to come forward with the recreation management plan to better preserve the islands themselves for their habitat, but also protect the cultural resources from visitation impacts, designating some camping, establishing a composting toilet to deal with human waste issues we were having there and the like. So that's an exciting one just to pull out. Region 5, others, as we move east in the state, we have a big grant we got from the National Park Service to help with preservation of the chief's house and store, and that includes foundation repairs, chinking a roof, and other sorts of upkeep. And so lots of work being done here. Out in Region 7, we have a partnership with Colorado Mesa University. They were searching for the remains of 9 U.S. Army soldiers who died during the battle. Indigenous oral history tells us that all but perhaps one of the indigenous warriors were removed from the battlefield, but there are other records then of these 9 U.S. soldiers that were buried in a mass grave. And so there's been interest in trying to locate that. Haven't been successful yet, but that's some of another type of work that we're doing at these sites. So just to highlight that. Table 1 has all of those sites listed if you want to take a further look through that. But with that, Mr. Chairman, I'll just make that a quick summary on the report and stand aside if you have any particular questions on projects. And Rachel is also with us on Zoom if you have any particulars for her.
Does any of the board members have questions for Hope or Rachel? Okay. And thank you, Hope, and for your presentation. The next item is an information item, is the 2021 Visitation and Camping Reservation Report.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. It was another big year for the system in Montana. As you'll note from the report, we had nearly 3.4 million visitors. We've had several news articles in the last couple of weeks, and maybe you've seen them. That visitation mark of 3.4 million was just a little bit lower than last year, than 2020, when we saw such a hike during the pandemic. So we have sustained that increased visitation. It has not gone away. And we were on track through July for another record year, but then smoke and drought conditions, and then as the cooler temperatures settled in, kind of slowed the pace. So we might have had even a higher year last year had those things not occurred. But it is still notable last year, even with the little dip, we're still almost 28% above visitation in 2019. So a huge increase. Overall, visitation has grown 71% since 2010. Part of that is increased visitation. Part of it is we're doing a better job counting people. So, I can't tell you specifically how much we might attribute, just we're doing a better job of counting. But we certainly have seen significant increases in visitation. The visitation report in the back of your binder there has details for each of the regions. I would note that regions 1 and 4 cumulatively account for just over half of the overall visitation, but we're seeing significant growth in regions 2, 6, and 7. So trends to watch and keep in mind. There were 11 parks last year whose visitation exceeded 100,000. That's up from 7 parks in 2019. So lots of interesting trends going on, and we're keeping an eye on those as we plan for future amenities and what we need to support this visitation. We aren't manufacturing recreation, we are providing the infrastructure for recreation. And so we need to make sure the infrastructure is strong. And as we look at our budget requests, we're looking at the visitation numbers to help us guide those thoughts as how we're supporting that infrastructure. Mr. Chairman, unless there are any particular questions on that, I could just go right into the reservation report, and then maybe we could combine questions after the two.
Please do.
In the reservation report, which follows your visitation report, something to note, they also saw the same kind of dip in 2021 versus 2020, a slight decrease of 1.23% in reservations, which corresponds with what we saw in the dip in visitation from 2020. So that just confirms the trend we see there. But in 2021, we had almost 120,000 reservations, and the breakout between resident and non-resident is 64% resident and 36% non-resident as you look at all the numbers across the state. Now that varies by park. And so if you'd like to get into the park specific numbers, they are included in the report on the last page, and you can take a look at that. So around Flathead Lake, we see numbers that look more like 50-50 generally between resident and non-resident reservation. But if you go look at Tongue River, it's a significantly more non-residents. If you look at Makoshika, it's more non-residents by far. And that's really because of where they're located, being on the border of other states, et cetera. And so that adds to those numbers. But generally, overall in the system, it's about 65-35 residents versus non-residents across the reservation system. So, Mr. Chair, I defer to questions.
Okay, does any of the board members have questions? Member Mo?
Mr. Chairman, thank you. Just kind of a comment, perhaps, and a question. Much of the information in your last report I read in the newspaper because that seems to be of high interest, I guess. I would like to see if there's some way we couldn't have the report that preceded it, the one on our cultural efforts, also get more ink in the paper, because I think that would also drive more interest in the parks. I didn't know that figure about the 7 of the 24, what is it, National
Historic Landmarks.
Yeah, are in the state parks. But just so people are aware that there are historical and cultural emphases in our state parks that are worth noting, would be good to publicize more.
That's a really great piece of feedback, Vice Chair. We can certainly work on how we're marketing that and getting the word out.
I've got a question about camping reservations. Most of the parks have camp hosts and they have employees. And there seems to be a seasonal time when those camping sites, the state parks are open. Seem to be getting warmer. Things happen earlier in the year. Is there any consideration that you might start doing reserve sites earlier? I mean, case in point here, I tried to make a reservation for our board meeting in May, and that park was not doing any reservations at that time. It was just walk-in only. And so it just seems like there's more people out. The weather's warmer earlier. And then later in the summer, if we end up with the smoke, not so much. But I understand that it takes a camp host, it takes employees. Just a thought that you might look at that a little bit.
Yeah, appreciate the feedback, Chairman. We can talk more about that internally. I do want to recognize Shanae Strobel, our program manager who handles the reservation system and our business systems in the enterprise. She does a phenomenal job. We've hired a support person, Tony Beth Ketchum, to work with Shanae because we're growing in our business systems and also in our enterprise program. And so Shanae's been here more than 2 decades, dedicating her work to the agency and particularly state parks. And my hat's off to her for that service.
Thank you. Any other discussions or questions for Hope? Okay, thanks for your presentation there. And close, let's see, the last informational item on the agenda is the update on the Fish, Wildlife and Parks planning and reorganization.
Yes, sir, Mr. Chairman. I think I'll start with the reorganization. So as you know, we've been working through the reorganization. My 6-month mark was on March 1st, and the director and I were talking about that. It's been the blink of an eye, but I have to be grateful because while I ski and whatnot, I'm not so much a fan of cold weather, and this was the fastest winter I've ever experienced. So thanks. Thanks for keeping me warm and busy. And so the reorg, let's see, I forget how you put it, Director. I forget the term you used. I say we're in the hairy middle of the reorg, where I can start to see the light coming through at the end of the tunnel, but we're in the nitty gritty of getting down into the regional staffing framework. And this is the part that matters really deeply to the staff on the ground and what changes are coming for them and how they're doing their jobs. So the way we're organizing the work in the regions is we've set up a regional staffing framework to work by geographic units. And that's both on the maintenance side and on the recreation management side. And the regions are in the heat of it right now, working on what those geographic units look like, what makes the most sense based on the FTE they have. Now that we have a broader pool of FTE to bring to bear on all of these sites, and we're no longer siloed into FAS staff working on FAS sites, park staff working on park sites, WMA staff working on WMA sites. As we start thinking about their work more broadly and what makes the most sense based on physical location, proximity, et cetera, the regions are going through those nitty gritty decisions right now. And my hat's off to them because, they're really putting some excellent thought into this. The director made the reorganization with efficiency and consistency in mind. And that efficiency as we set up these geographic units is what's at heart. The other thing I want to say, though, is that in setting up the geographic units, there's been concern that we'll somehow just recreate different silos where people are focused just on this geographic unit and end up in this place where we're not being nimble and shifting with the needs. And that is not the case. As we work on rewriting pretty much all of the position descriptions that are involved in this. We're very specifically saying you're assigned to a geographic unit or units and maybe called on to work in other units as well, depending on requirements of the season or whatever. And so we're looking at being as nimble and flexible as possible. And I also want to say in that vein, this is going to be an adaptive management approach to this reorganization setup. We're choosing a starting point with these geographic units. We're gonna get our feet on the ground through this season, see how it goes, learn some lessons. I'm sure some of them will be hard lessons. Some of them will be like, oh, okay, yeah, that really did make sense. Let's keep doing that. But it will be adaptive management and we'll adjust as we go. We have a Marine in the room, and improvise, adapt, and overcome is his motto. And so that's what we'll be doing this season. We'll be transitioning within the transition. So we're setting up the geographic units and changing people's scopes of work. But at the same time, we need to recognize the expertise that they have. River recreation managers, for instance, in regions 2 and 3, and WMA managers in 1, 2, 3, and 4. How do we capitalize on that knowledge that they have, their relationships with the landowners, and yet broaden the folks involved with those sites and that work so that we're sharing the load, bringing more resources to bear. And so we're having some really detailed conversations on how to make this work best. And again, it will be adaptive and we'll learn some things and keep going forward. We have our new Stewardship Bureau Chief hired, Ryan Tainton. He was our FAS program manager down in Region 5. He's located in Absaroka, and he's doing a fantastic job. He and the Stewardship Bureau is in charge of maintenance, capital projects, acquisition, heritage, and cultural compliance. Those are the things that fall in that bureau. We're next going to be hiring the Access and Landowner Relations Bureau Chief. We're finalizing that position description at the State Human Resources Office, and then we'll get that hiring going. In the Access and Landowner Relations Bureau, we have all the existing hunting and fishing access programs, as well as recreation of all kinds, the trail grant programs, trail planning, trail coordination, landowner relations of all types, whether it's private landowners or with public entities. We are putting the shooting range development program in that bureau as well in terms of a form of access. We have lots of folks who pay excise taxes on ammunition and firearms, but don't necessarily hunt or fish. And so the shooting ranges are a component to ensuring their access to their contribution to these recreational dollars. And so just a point in including that in the Access Bureau. The third bureau and the last one that will be hired is the Visitor Services Bureau. That's where we have the reservation system with Shanae leading strongly there, our AmeriCorps and volunteer program with Sesh Dyer leading strongly there, the interpretation and education functions, which the bureau chief will be spearheading once they're hired. And I'm forgetting something, I'm sorry. Commercial use, permitting, those sorts of things. River recreation ultimately will be in visitor services, but for now, Charlie Sperry, assistant administrator, will be leading river recreation for the time being. He's got a history in that and a strong presence as we work through this new structure across the state for it. Looking at, as I said, those position descriptions are going through the reclassification process. And then once we have those all finalized, we'll get to hiring, which is what everybody's eager about because the season is upon us. The recreation management side position descriptions are all finalized and are out and ready for hiring. The maintenance position descriptions are being finalized right now, and we're just a few days away probably from getting those finished and ready for the hiring to begin. We have been bringing back staff, reactivating seasonals and whatnot as those needs arise, and it makes sense. Before the position descriptions are finalized, warning them, just so you know, you're getting a new position description, your scope of work will be broader, so keep that in mind and want those folks to get a heads up. But we're trying to be as trying to disrupt folks as little as possible in this transition. And so trying to be as thoughtful and giving them as much notice as possible as we make these staffing changes and transition them to new position descriptions, new supervisors, et cetera. So any questions on the reorg?
So thanks for that. Looks like the last agenda item is public comment on issues not on the agenda. Did I
Mr. Chairman, do you want to do a planning update? I can go through it pretty quickly. I know it's late in the day. That was on there too. I started with the reorg,
I'm
so
sorry.
got you out of order. I
Sorry.
apologize.
Go ahead.
We have several planning processes going on. I'll hit the big ones. Fish Creek, the state park site there, but also 2 fishing access sites and a wildlife management area in that area of Mineral County west of Missoula. We're working on that holistic planning process there. We're engaging the University of Montana. Their recreation and natural resource management programs are going to contract with us to help us with that, because we're doing this planning process in a new way where we are looking holistically across all of the site types in this area so that we're managing the recreation and mitigating resource impacts and protecting the resources, again, in looking at the big picture for that area. So that's a big one for us, and we're all very excited about kicking that off with them. We expect that to start in April. Summers Beach, we've been talking about that already with the interim amenities today. Cayenne Bishop is working with Region 1 on leading that planning effort, and they're about to kick off the public scoping pieces of it. We expect it to conclude by the end of the year, but looking at what is the big vision for this site and where we're going to take it with amenities in a permanent way. Placid Lake, we are in Region 2 doing some visioning with the surrounding community, engaging with the Nature Conservancy because they have so much land ownership right around the Placid Lake State Park area along Owl Creek Road, and are seeing a lot of resource impacts on their land from dispersed camping that's taking place. And so we're talking about their lands, Placid Lake, how we might look at that in a holistic way with recreation management in that area, because the folks recreating on their lands and camping on their lands are coming to Placid Lake and using our facilities. And certainly the boat ramp is open in public for use, but they're using the shower facilities, there are considerations for the septic system, et cetera. The day use area might need some reconfiguration and so forth. And so we want to engage in that in a proactive way so we can get ahead of the curve on impacts that are already occurring before they get more impactful. The lower Yellowstone we've talked a lot about today. I'll just hit a little bit on the phases of planning. So we have the acquisitions that we're working on. Thank you for your endorsements today. Each of those will sort of drive a mini planning process for a site and looking at amenities at that site and the possibilities based on the site's purpose, whether it's habitat preservation. That Wildcat Bend site could be a primitive trail with a little bit of parking. It's a few hundred acres that people could hike around and hunt and whatnot. Versus a site like Zero or another site we have in front of the commission called Cracker Box that have more amenities, boat ramps and parking and some camping maybe potentially depending on the site. So we'll be doing many planning processes, but looking at the whole as we set those up of what, okay, we're handling this piece here over on this site. This site's a habitat piece. We're going to focus on it in this way, just looking at the whole picture. So we are keeping those things in mind as we piece out what access and amenities are where, trying to be consistent and thoughtful in the approach. And so then a piece we'll be doing long-term planning for the whole corridor, which is a new thing in managing an area in this way. Might be akin to what we're doing at Fish Creek, where we're looking broader across boundaries within this corridor, looking at this couple 100-mile stretch and how we're going to manage recreation on it. So there'll be that long-term piece. But then in the very short term, the advisory committee had recommended a water trail and suggested starting between Glendive and Sydney and having a designated water trail with a map and a visitor guide. The BLM has something already that we're looking to build on and use as sort of a template, but designating some camping at the public sites that are already along this stretch, and then looking for opportunities to augment those with additional access, but providing tips for floaters on where the travel times, et cetera. This is an example of how, as we look at something in the whole, we're looking not just at the access and the recreation, but also at the habitat. So there are 2 wildlife management areas on that stretch, Seven Sisters and Elk Islands. And we already have some dispersed camping happening there, but we would expect with the water trail, there will be more potentially. And so we're looking already from the impacts that are occurring to designate some camping instead of having just dispersed camping at those sites. So that's where you'll start to see those habitat and access and recreation pieces overlapping. So we're talking about designating camping on the riverside for people using the water trail, but then also looking at the roadside access and maybe designating camping on the roadside, because there are impacts, particularly during hunting season, that we're noting. And we want to be sure that we're preserving that wildlife management area for the purpose, which is to make sure it's there for the animals and maintaining that population for future generations. Switching gears, Headwaters, which you certainly have heard a lot about and got that report at your December meeting. That master plan process is wrapping up. We will have the final document with the contract ending this month with WWC Engineering. We had an advisory team meeting a couple of weeks ago where we looked at it at the what's been put together of people's ideas of what might be possible at the site, a phased prioritization based on comments received. And at the top were things like more staffing, trail work. In phase 2 was a visitor center, and down the line with increased camping. There are folks who are interested in Frisbee golf facilities. I personally am interested, as the mother of an almost 3-year-old, in having a playground of some kind, a natural play area. So anyway, we'll be taking the results of that work and moving it into phase 2 planning at Headwaters. That master plan is a guide for us and gives us food for thought for what we're going to take next in the first phase of implementation. And we'll be continuing to seek public comment with that. We are, Quinn Kuka, our tribal liaison, is working with the tribes on invitations to a field day that we're having April 15th at the site to get more tribal input on what we might consider as we look at that landscape, given their use of the site and cultural tie to it. We want to be very thoughtful and look at them in a partnership as we move forward with the site of what we might do there. Any improvements we wouldn't want to put in culturally sensitive areas, for instance, and they're going to help us give that feedback. We also have Rachel Reckon applied for and just got word on her first day back from maternity leave that we received a grant to help with ethnography there at Headwaters, so that we know more about the cultural assets there. And telling that tribal story. We want to incorporate that fully into the planning and development we're doing there so that it's a good partnership and people can come and learn. You might hear from Angie Grove. She was on the advisory team and she suggested that at Headwaters, it makes sense because of where it's located between Yellowstone and Glacier to have sort of an entree into the state park system and recreational opportunities in Montana. People often stop there on their way between the 2 national parks, and perhaps building a visitor center where you could come and learn about the other parks around the state. Dave Andrews, the park manager, called it a menu. What did he call it? What was the word he used? A sampler park. A sampler park. Because Headwaters has a little bit of everything. You've got a pictograph, you've got, water recreation and on. And so using that as sort of a gateway to the rest of our system for folks traveling between those 2 national parks. So those are the main ones going on right now. The 2 that I want to be sure to point out that we have our eye on as next steps for planning First Peoples with that lease renewal and what's the plan there for how we're going to work on improving that site. And then Cooney State Park, which ties into your mention, Board Member Brown, about the planned cabin sites there. I want to commend the Region 5 Park staff for putting together an awesome package of possibilities as we were seeking ideas for improvements at various sites around the state and working on our budget requests for the 23 session. They put together an awesome package of ideas of potential for Cooney. It's a well-used site and needs some more love and help in managing the visitors, but also providing them more amenities, dealing with the impacts. And so based on that, I've turned my sights on Cooney as one of our next big planning processes so that we can have an informed, thoughtful discussion about what's appropriate there. So that's the wrap up, Mr. Chair. There's been a lot of work, Mr. Chair, and a lot of people have been, man, nose to the grindstone, putting in a lot of hours, getting it all done. It is a huge effort and a great team doing the work. So. Mhm.
I just wanted to thank you for bringing that to us and all the information, all the different projects going on. It's pretty an exciting time to be here. So thank you for that. And thank you for working with us and helping us try to put it all into a workable ball of goo.
Something digestible anyhow.
Yes.
Yeah. Hopefully. And Board Member Mo, I hope you don't feel like he's rubbing it in, that he gets to stay and play with the goo and you're going to go play with the grandkids. They have their own goo though. So yeah.
Okay, so then we'll move to the last item on the agenda. Public comments for issues not on this agenda. Is there anyone in the Helena here that would like to comment? Yes, we have somebody.
Chair Kip, members of the board, my name is Bob Walker, and today I'm representing the Montana Trails Recreation and Parks Association. That's an organization that's made up of the professional staff of the cities and towns, parks and recreation departments, their commissioners, board members, volunteers like me, and about 30 members of the businesses of the retail community. They're hosting their first annual, they call it annual, their first annual conference in 3 years on April 3rd through the 6th in Great Falls at the Holiday Inn. And I'm here to invite you to that meeting. You really need to be there, since I've always said, and Hank, you might not appreciate what I'm going to say here, but I've always called this board Small State Parks and Recreation Board, because you work with the whole parks and recreation community, not just state parks in this state. And so I'm hoping some of you can attend that conference. I've contacted the executive director of that organization and asked her to send you personal letters of invite, and you'll be getting information from me within the next 2 days by email about more detail. And I know you're getting tired, so that's all I have to say. Thank you.
Anybody else in the room? Okay, any comments from the regional offices? I'm not seeing any. Scott, are you seeing any? Uh-oh. You're muted.
Sorry, Mr. Chair, I am not seeing any hands raised from the regional offices.
Okay. And then any buddy just that Zoom in that has comments? I think I have a couple names on my.
Yes, we do. The first is Mark Cook, Wolves of the Rockies. Mark, you can go ahead and speak.
Chair, board members, my name is Mark Cook, and out of fairness and transparency, I'm with a Montana nonprofit called Wolves of the Rockies. I want to tell you, I'm really impressed. This is my first meeting listening to you folks talk, and I'm really impressed with your desire to make a difference. I'd like to thank you for the opportunity to speak, and I thank you all for your commitment to public service. It's clear that all of you are committed to producing a safe, enjoyable experience for individuals like myself who live in Montana and others that visit here. I love camping here. I love hiking here. I use the state parks. My family uses, the rivers, everything that you're responsible for. This also goes for many tourists that visit Montana, especially the Glacier National Park and Yellowstone National Park area. My family and friends and tourists that come here They come here to see the wildlife, and they come here to see the terrain that is Montana. They love Glacier National Park, but they especially love the wildlife. I'm talking to them, and I'm some of the tourists that I talk to when I go down to Yellowstone and I go to Glacier, they're telling me that they're not happy with some of the experiences that they're having with wildlife right now. They're not seeing wolves that they've seen in the past. They're not hearing wolves that they've seen in the past. They're not seeing some of the wildlife that they've seen in the past. And I'll be honest with you, the senior management with FWP isn't listening to the non-consumptive community. Most of the Wildlife Commission isn't listening to the non-consumptive community. I encourage you to please listen to the non-consumptive community to the point where you'll reach out to us, talk to us, hear our concerns, and then take up our concerns with a commission and a senior management at FWP that isn't listening to us. I appreciate the opportunity to speak. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mark. Scott, do we have anybody else?
Yes, we do. The next person is Kobe Gerke. Kobe, go ahead.
Chairman Kipp, members of the board, once again, Kobe Gerke, Executive Director of the Montana State Parks Foundation. In the past, I've always had opportunities to present to this board on a pretty regular basis and kind of give just brief updates on what the foundation is doing. And I realize that with all the change happening at FWP and all the exciting projects you've heard about today, that it's been a while since we've checked in. I wanted to just take 2 minutes of your time here at the end of a long day and do so. Harkening back to the very beginning of the meeting, some of the reports that were given by members. Member Loomis, you talked about Fort Owen, where we met for the first time, and Summers Beach. And I wanted to let you guys know that we're very involved in both of those projects. And right now at Fort Owen, Lauren Flynn and his team in Region 2 have convened and have hired a planner and have convened a great group of folks to lead an effort to determine what the interpretive system or the interpretive displays at Fort Owen will look like. And it's a unique opportunity to invest a bunch of money into interpretation at the longest continually inhabited site in Montana, which is Fort Owen. Normally, you don't get to invest these kind of resources into interpretation and preservation, but in this case, we were able to secure a big grant to help do that. At Summers Beach, where I know your next meeting will be taking place in May, we're very excited to host you there, where we'll be working with FWP, Dave Landstrom and Region 1 and his team to host an event, a ribbon cutting on hopefully a new parking lot and some visitor amenities there, and honoring some of the donors who are helping to make this initial phase of amenities to make the park open and accessible possible. To that note, I believe Colleen Firthmeyer has forwarded you my public comment earlier, but from earlier when I wasn't able to comment on Summers Beach, I did just want to say that we raised almost $250,000 for Summers Beach, $249,600 to be exact. 145 of that is in cash, 105,000 of that is in endowed funds that will be available for that park in perpetuity. And we'll build interest off of those and use that money to match grants and leverage other dollars to help Summers Beach in the long term. So it's not just a short-term investment for us. Member Brown, you talked about the Chief Plentycoo Tiny House, and I appreciate your support financially on that project. We were able to go out and about triple your money and help pay for all the furnishings and sales that went into that project. And I think it's a great public-private partnership, not just with the school district and us, but with FWP and others as well. So much appreciated there. I also wanted to mention that we're working hard to get a yurt built at Makoshika this spring. I know Hope and her team have been creative solutions to deal with the lack of contractors that is a reality that state parks are dealing with. It's hard to get people out to some of these parks to build things that have been in the works for years, but it sounds like there's a good plan, and the reorganization is a going to play a pivotal role in that. I also wanted to let you know that we're working on at Frenchtown Pond, and this all abilities dock will be accessible to anyone with any physical handicap. Well, not any, but most physical handicaps, and it'll include a kayak and canoe launching station so that people that are usually excluded from water-based recreation will have a great opportunity right next to Missoula. And then finally, I really encourage you to Google visionsofchiefplentycoo.com. And when you do, you'll find yourself at a web page that we created that is highlighting a film that we're working on that talks about plenty.
Mr. Gerke, it appears we've lost your signal.
Veterans attending the 100-year ceremony, 100-year anniversary ceremony of that event. So I encourage you to look into that on your own time. I won't attempt to display it here today. And just wanted to thank you for your time, and I look forward to meeting all of you, hopefully in person, at your next meeting in Region 1. Thank you.
Thank you.
All right, the last person here is Angie Grove. Angie, go ahead.
Thank you, Scott. Chair Kip, I too just wanted to circle back around to the members' reports. They were very good. And in particular, I'd like to thank Vice Chair Mo for her services to the state park system over the last few years. Everyone knows that anytime Mary's involved, she brings a level of passion, energy, and attention to detail that very few people do. And she moved the needle for state parks. She's done heavy lifting for this system for several years. And I just wanted to circle back and thank her for her service. You were a great member on the State Parks Board, Mary, and we'll miss you. Thank you.
Thank you.
Mr. Chair, there appears to be no more speakers that wish to speak, so I'm going to hand it back to you.
Thanks, Scott. If there are no more commenters, are there any other further comments from our board members? And I'd like to thank her for being so helpful. If she moved this meeting along and got me on schedule today, I do appreciate that. And I'm hoping that we'll see you at Summers Beach in that meeting. So, okay.
Mr. Chairman, I remember before I met Mary, I think I was looking at one of your comments, and I want to thank you for your work on the Summers Beach project. And I remember you said you likened it to when you were first considering it, and of course you were there, and to purchasing your first car or your son in a car. And you said, but this is a really shiny car. So thank you for voting for the shiny car.
Well, yeah, let's see here. I'm looking. That would conclude today's meeting. Our next board meeting is scheduled for the 11th or the 12th and 13th in Kalispell. Would someone like to make the motion to adjourn? Okay, second to that. Okay, all in favor?
Aye.
Hi.
This meeting is now.
Thank you.
Forgot to do that earlier.